Chapter 389. Depth wasn't standing so high up for nothing. This position guaranteed that he could attack from any angle in the surrounding streets. Of course, this guy was no exception. Depth drew his bow and released an arrow. The person who came was, of course, Gu Fei. That grand mansion was Sunset City's wanted office. Gu Fei had been constantly clearing his PK points. The player who had just accepted the quest was a player who was leveling outside the city. While Gu Fei was pursuing him, he received a message from the Han family young master saying that he needed support in the dungeon. However, rather than giving up on the quest and running back, he might as well kill the target and use the emblem's teleportation function. After all, the wanted office and the dungeon could be said to be neighbors. As a result, after finishing off the quest, he quickly rushed back. As soon as he walked out, he saw Unsworn Sword and Todd standing on the stairs, being shot at by the surrounding archers. Gu Fei hadn't noticed the traps all over the ground, but he could guess that they must have been restrained by something. So, he hurriedly walked forward and raised his sword, ready to cast an area of effect spell on the enemy's densely populated area. But before he could start chanting, he suddenly felt a murderous intent coming from above. He looked up and saw that Depth's bowstring had already been released. This arrow came very quickly, and more importantly, it was silent. If there was a sound, Gu Fei could have dodged the moment it was released. But now, he only saw the arrow when he turned his head. Even Gu Fei could feel the opponent's murderous aura, so it was obvious that the two of them were quite close. The arrow was silent and fast, and even Gu Fei was a little flustered by it. The sword that was pointed at him quickly slid sideways, and the tip of the sword finally struck the arrow, knocking it down. Everyone else was stunned. Only Gu Fei felt like he had been put in a difficult situation. Even his face was a little hot. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, he suddenly heard a "pa" sound under his feet. Gu Fei knew something was wrong and wanted to move his feet to dodge, but this time it was too late. The water trap arrow was much more flexible and fast than ordinary traps, and there was no need to break through the ground to escape. No matter how fast Gu Fei's reaction was, it was too late. The delicate trap had already popped out, and his feet were already pinned to the ground. "You're so stupid." Slim Waist Dance was hoping for a savior to come, but she didn't expect to end up like this. They had already experienced Water Depth's trap arrow before, and the skill's duration and cooldown were just right. Wasn't that how Unsworn Sword was nailed to the ground? Now that Unsworn Sword was trapped in the trap array, there was no need to be so meticulous. Instead, Deepwater immediately threw the trap arrow at Gu Fei. "What are you panicking for?" Gu Fei was calm. At this time, Water Depth shouted from the top of the wall, "Kill this guy first." On the other side, Slim Waist Dance and Unsworn Sword were two melee classes. Boundless Thicket was a shadow priest who didn't have much attack power. After being trapped in the trap, they could only be bullied by the ranged archers. However, Gu Fei was a mage, and his ranged attacks were at the level of instant kills. If he threw out his spells, anyone who was supposed to die would die. It didn't matter if he was trapped or not, so they had to kill him first. All the archers turned their arrows, and Boundless Thicket immediately panicked. Gu Fei had only taken a few steps before he fell into Water Depth's trap. Currently, the archers could shoot him at this distance, but as a priest, her skill range was a bit too low, so she couldn't cast it on Gu Fei. Thinking that Gu Fei was everyone's only hope, Boundless Thicket decided to do a standing long jump. She jumped more than a meter away, and of course, stepped into the trap. However, it only restricted her movement and didn't affect her skills. Boundless Thicket raised her hand and cast a healing spell on the trap. Seeing how bold the girl was and how she jumped out of Todd's protection, Deepwater thought to himself, "You're just courting death. Do you think a priest like you can save him?" In the end, he saw the most shocking scene he had ever seen in the game. Everyone had already released their arrows, but Gu Fei was already prepared. His right hand was still holding onto his sword, and his left hand pulled out a knife from his pocket. Both his hands danced together, and suddenly, the image of a real knife and sword appeared. The arrows that were shot at him fell to the ground one after another. Although there were some that slipped through the net, The damage of 1 or 2 arrows was quickly recovered with the help of vast expanses recovery. After this wave of arrows, everyone was dumbfounded. A player's mouth was wide open for a long time, and he finally spat out, "Motherfucker, are you trying to perform acrobatics?" All the archers forgot to immediately launch a second wave of attacks, but Gu Fei's hands didn't stop. The sword in his right hand had just knocked down the last arrow, and his left wrist suddenly flipped over, holding the baptism of flames. Then he took the opportunity to stab behind him from under his armpit. Ouch! A cry of surprise came from behind him, obviously surprised by this attack. Dual flame flash. Gu Fei chanted, and the night streak in his right hand had already thrown out. Because his feet were stuck in the trap, he couldn't move an inch, and Gu Fei twisted his body in an exaggerated manner. But because his feet weren't in a good position, this move wasn't very smooth. The person behind him had already retreated after being hit, and this sword actually missed. Gu Fei could only sigh helplessly. If his feet could move, his opponent definitely wouldn't have been able to dodge his sword. Cuckoo! This sword didn't hit at all, but Deepwater let out an anxious roar, leaping up from the roof and pouncing towards Gu Fei's side. Seeing this, Gu Fei hurriedly swung his sword. Wall of electricity, descend. Ouch fuck. Deepwater cursed in midair. Leaping down from the roof was supposed to be very carefree, but who knew that Gu Fei would suddenly erect a wall in front of him, and Deepwater immediately pounced on the wall like a tiger pouncing on its prey. What was even more tragic was that the wall of electricity had a suction effect. Deepwater didn't fall after hitting the wall, but instead maintained his posture and stuck to the wall like a gecko. Electricity flowed around his body, and from time to time, he would spit out 2 sparks that fell to the ground. Ah! Deepwater! The person behind Gu Fei didn't care about Gu Fei anymore, and dashed under the wall of electricity, raising his head to look at Deepwater hanging above. Put him down! This person angrily turned around and yelled at Gu Fei. Only then did Gu Fei see that this person was actually a girl, and immediately thought of her relationship with Deepwater, but he only smiled and said, "Wait a moment." At this time, the trap under their feet had already been opened, and Gu Fei dashed out like an arrow. The girl wanted to stop him, but Gu Fei nimbly turned around and swept past her, striding towards the archers. The archers seemed to have woken up from a dream, and all raised their arrows to shoot. Gu Fei's left blade and right sword were invincible, and the ground was covered with arrows wherever he went, and his body was also pierced by quite a few. No matter how abnormal his skills were, he still couldn't take care of himself, but fortunately, he had boundless Mang Mang's recovery, which allowed him to hold on. If Gu Fei was fighting alone, he might have already died under the arrows. Be careful of the traps. Seeing that Gu Fei was charging forward, Slender Waist Dance hurriedly warned. Next was the area filled with the enemy's traps. Although Gu Fei could teleport, the distance of 5 meters wasn't enough to float to the enemy's side. However, Gu Fei had already seen it clearly. Although the traps were tightly laid, there were still many gaps in them. When these gaps fell into Gu Fei's eyes, he very easily strung out a few footwork steps that he had practiced since he was young. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that if it weren't for the fact that there were high and low steps, and if it were on flat ground, as long as Gu Fei took the first step, he wouldn't step into the traps even if he closed his eyes. Thus, everyone saw that Gu Fei's footsteps didn't slow down at all. Pa pa pa. Step by step, he stepped on the gaps in the traps, and after a few steps, he was already in front of an archer. The ambusher had a bow in his left hand and an arrow in his right. He didn't know how to defend himself, so he turned around and ran. Gu Fei's hands were fast, and he quickly reached out and hooked his self-made flying hook to the person's collar, while the other end of the rope was thrown to Unsworn Sword. After Unsworn Sword caught it, he was naturally overjoyed. He had been standing there as a target for so long, and now he could finally put his skills to good use. He immediately roared and pulled on the rope. How could a small ambusher fight against Unsworn Sword's strength? He was pulled to the ground on the spot, and was then mercilessly dragged all the way. The traps on the ground hit him one by one, and in the blink of an eye, he was dragged to his feet by Unsworn Sword. Unsworn Sword was addicted to this, and reached out to pick up the guy and throw him away, then pulled on the rope again. But this was only a hook that was hooked to a person's collar, so how could it be so secure? The moment he threw it, the hook slipped off and the person didn't return. Unsworn Sword couldn't play anymore, so he threw the hook at Gu Fei. Brother Qianli, hook another one for me. Gu Fei was fighting with a few ambushers. When Unsworn Sword threw the hook, Gu Fei caught it, and in the blink of an eye, it had already hooked onto a person's clothes. Ah! The person panicked and reached out to grab it, but Unsworn Sword, who had been waiting for a long time, had already used his strength, and the person disappeared with a whoosh. Gu Fei's dual flame flash killed the two people next to him, then rushed towards his next target. The number of archers had decreased, and the arrows they shot were no longer a threat to Gu Fei. Boundless Mang was no longer using healing spells, but was using mana sacrifice to replenish Gu Fei's mana. Unsworn Sword dragged another person over. After throwing him out last time, he immediately got rid of the person's control. Just as he was considering whether to kill him directly this time, or to hook him more firmly, Slender Waist Dance jumped and said, "Throw him over here, throw him over here." Unsworn Sword didn't think much of it, and responded with a okay, then threw the person over this time. The person fell to the ground and rolled, immediately destroying a lot of the traps. Slender Waist Dance stepped on the person, adjusted her direction, and kicked him out with all her might. This person cleared the traps on the ground in a daze, and in the direction he rolled out, the archers panicked even more. This person rolled out of a passage, and Slender Waist Dance was already charging over from the passage. Chapter 390. The poor player kicked by Slender Waist Dance rolled forward like a bowling ball, while the lurkers in that direction were as uneasy as pins that were about to be hit by a bowling ball. A few people hurriedly shot arrows at Slender Waist Dance, but this girl's equipment was too strong. She blocked and dodged the arrows that were shot at her, and she didn't seem to care even if they hit her. In the blink of an eye, the bowling ball had already cleared a lane. Slender Waist Dance quickly arrived, and it was too late for those guys to escape. After knocking one unconscious with a club and stabbing another to death with a knife, the other panicked and directly stepped into a trap set by his own people. This trap was selfless. Even if the owner stepped into it, it would still bite him. What suspense could there be after that? Slender Waist Dance very calmly took care of them one by one, then ignored the wailing of the guy on the ground who was covered in traps, helped him adjust his position, and kicked at the bowling ball below him. On the other side, Water Depth, who was hanging on the wall of electricity, had finally held on for 20 seconds. As he fell to the ground, his body was still twitching intermittently, and he couldn't even stand properly. Ku, who was at the side, reached out to support him, but she was also numbed as if she had been electrocuted. She reflexively retracted her hand, and without anyone to support him, Water Depth immediately fell to the ground. Ku carefully stretched out her finger to test it, and the electricity finally completely disappeared. She hurriedly reached out to help Water Depth up. Water Depth was obviously a little dizzy from the electricity, and his eyes were a little dull. Ku hugged his head and shook it, then roared twice, and he finally came back to his senses. Fuck! Water Depth immediately cursed when he came back to his senses, and waved the bow in his hand, shouting, "Where is he? Where is he?" The person was right in front of him, and Gu Fei had already rushed into the trap array. Water Depth watched as this guy stepped into the trap array step by step, but continued to kill as if nothing had happened. His pitiful subordinates had all become traps for others. Even that sword without oath was having so much fun. Water Depth gritted his teeth in anger, and raised his bow, about to shoot. Be careful! Mang Mang had been paying attention to his movements, and immediately warned him when he saw that he was about to make a move. Sword without oath was having fun, and he just stood there and dragged people around, not caring if he had stepped into a trap. Seeing that Water Depth was about to shoot again, he immediately puffed out his chest in revenge. Ha! Come, shoot me! Whoosh! The arrow hit Sword without oath in the head. Actually, Deepwater had originally intended to shoot this arrow at Gu Fei, who was the most troublesome to deal with. However, Unsworn Sword's arrogant and cocky demeanor was simply unbearable, so he rewarded the arrow to him on the spot. Unsworn Sword had taken quite a few arrows to the head today. Although he did not die, as an effect of being hit by the arrows, he would still bleed symbolically. As a result, a drop of blood flowed from the east to the west, and his entire head was now as red as a clown's. His original thought was that water depth was going to shoot those trap arrows, but his head was already red like a clown sword. Just as he was about to curse, Mang Mang angrily roared at him, "What are you doing? I don't have time to care about you right now." Unsworn Sword thought about it and agreed. Gu Fei was the main fighting force right now. Boundless Mang was currently using her special skill to maintain Gu Fei's mana. How could she have the time to do any recovery? At this moment, Unsworn Sword finally understood why the Han family young master had arranged for this girl, whom he was not familiar with, to escort Todd. It turned out that it was all for this moment. As for Slender Waist Dance, it turned out that she had been in stealth all this time. This was because she was the only one who could keep up with the player's normal walking speed while in stealth. After giving Unsworn Sword a chance to vent his anger, Deepwater prepared to shoot the second arrow at Gu Fei. However, seeing that Gu Fei was already prepared, he thought about how so many arrows had been blocked by him with his weapon. What was the point of shooting an arrow by himself? The current situation, as well as Boundless Mang's unthinking roar, allowed him to immediately make a decision. He shot the second arrow at Unsworn Sword. There were 4 opponents. With Gu Fei's skills, Water Depth wasn't confident that he could hit him. Slender Waist Dance was agile, so it wouldn't be easy to hit her. Moreover, the girl's equipment was ridiculously high, so even if he hit her, she might not be able to take it seriously. Then there was Boundless Mang, who hid behind Todd, which was an angle that Water Depth couldn't hit. On the other hand, Sword of Unsworn was the easiest to shoot out of the 4 of them, and he happened to be the leader of this mission. Shooting him to death might have some unexpected effects. After analyzing all of these factors, there was no other choice for Water Depth to shoot the second arrow. Unsworn Sword was hit in the head by an arrow, followed by another arrow in the chest. Seeing that Water Depth was really going to fight him to the death, he immediately regretted shouting at Water Depth. Fortunately, no matter what, he was still the guild leader of a large guild. On the warrior ranking board of the game, he was also one of the top players. Although Water Depth was one of the 5 roaches, he was a lurker, and archery wasn't his strong suit. After 2 arrows, Unsworn Sword was still fine for the time being. He turned his head to look at the other 3. Slender Waist Dance and Gu Fei were focused on killing, and did not look in his direction at all. Boundless Mang Mang was at the side, and was looking at him. However, the expression in his eyes could only be described as a cold bystander. Boundless Mang was indeed a female hero. She said she didn't have time to care about you, and she really didn't have time to care about you. At this moment, she had no intention of healing Unsworn Sword at all. At a crucial moment, he could only rely on himself. Unsworn Sword had left a small path around him that was free of traps because he had used his flying hook earlier. Of course, he couldn't just let Water Depth shoot him to death, so he immediately stepped onto this self-made safe path. It was a pity that with his movement speed, Water Depth was still able to deal with him, and his arrows never missed. Unsworn Sword was anxious, and what was even more infuriating was that when he started moving, Todd also started moving. In fact, every time Todd was brought out of the dungeon, he had to go through a setting, and that was to follow someone in the 4 Cs. All this time, Todd's target had always been Unsworn Sword. However, even though this NPC said that he was following them, it was more accurate to say that everyone was following him. Although he was following the Sword of Unsworn, he had always walked on his own, moving at a constant speed. No matter how fast the target was moving, he would always move at the same pace. Therefore, the speed of the group had always been based on Todd's pace. As for what would happen if they left him behind, they had never tried it, mainly because they didn't dare to. At this moment, when Unsworn Sword moved, Todd immediately obediently took a step to the side. Then there was a pause sound. Todd seemed to have no other special characteristics other than his high HP. This step caused him to step into a trap, and he immediately fell for it, standing there stupidly without moving. Unsworn Sword didn't think so much at this time. He only cared about dodging the arrows and charging forward. In fact, it wasn't a big deal that Todd fell into a trap. The big deal was that he took the step, and this step immediately exposed the vast expanse to Waterdepth's arrows. With Waterdepth's experience, he had long noticed that the light shining from the staff was exactly the same as the light surrounding Gu Fei, and guessed that the two of them had some sort of coordination. It was just that this girl had a lot of combat experience in the vast expanse, and kept hiding behind Todd, not giving him a chance. Meanwhile, the other subordinates were focused on avoiding the pursuit of Gu Fei and Slender Waist Dance, so they didn't pay attention to these details. At this moment, the Sword of No Oath suddenly moved, and Todd followed suit. The vast expanse of land was immediately exposed, and all of this happened in the blink of an eye. However, Waterdepth had already caught onto it and shot an arrow towards the vast expanse of land. This arrow from Unsworn Sword caught Todd off guard, and the skill was immediately interrupted. This skill came with a weapon, and it had a long cooldown. Once it was interrupted, he probably wouldn't have a chance to use it again until the end of the battle. Unsworn Sword first cast a healing spell on himself, and then realized that it was Unsworn Sword's random movement that messed up the situation. He was very angry, but he still focused on the bigger picture, and used a healing spell on Unsworn Sword with his staff. "What are you doing?" Unsworn Sword also knew that he had caused trouble in the battle, but in that situation, if he didn't move, was he supposed to just wait for death? So he said helplessly, "What can I do if I don't move?" Unsworn Sword obviously knew that he was helpless, so he couldn't say anything. After hurriedly helping him recover his HP, the two of them looked at Gu Fei with some worry. When Gu Fei had mana, each of his attacks was a one-hit kill. Now that he didn't have mana, his aura didn't seem to decrease much. The Night Streamer in his right hand had already been replaced by the Fire Baptism, and this slash was still accompanied by fire and lightning from time to time. It didn't look much different from before. Of course, the power of the additional fire attack was incomparable to the power of the double flame flash. But even so, the group of lurkers still fled like rats under Gu Fei's slash. Unsworn Sword and Unsworn Sword looked at each other, feeling that their worries were unnecessary. For this abnormally strong person, an anomaly among mages, did it really matter whether he had mana or not? The one who suffered the most was, of course, Waterdepth. He excitedly interrupted Unsworn Sword's spell, thinking that it would have a strong impact on the battle, but he found that his group of brothers were still so unsightly and were quickly sacrificed under the pursuit of Gu Fei and Slender Waist Dance. "Waterdepth!" Ku called out to him softly from beside Waterdepth. This couple had played 6 online games together and fought side by side who knew how many times. Ku's skills, experience, and insight might not be as good as Waterdepth, but they weren't far off. At this time, she could also see that it would be very difficult for their operation to succeed, because the opponent was just too strong. Chapter 391. At this time, a large number of players were rushing over from the north gate of Sunset City. Among them were Sunset City mercenaries who had rushed over to assassinate the Emperor. There were also players from Cloud City who had rushed over to protect the Emperor. Both sides were killing each other as they hurried along the way. However, the first to reach the north gate were the people from Sunset City. This was because they had a big advantage over the players from Cloud City. The people they had sacrificed were all resurrected in Sunset City. As for Cloud Peak City, their accounts were currently in Waterside City. The mercenary group players who had sacrificed themselves were all resurrected in Waterside City. As for the unhindered Four Seas players, they had already returned to their hometown, Cloud Peak City. At this time, the first to reach the North Gate were the players from Sunset City who had killed their way over from the resurrection point near the North Gate. This group of people rushed to the North Gate, looked around, and suddenly felt suspicious. They could only feel that Todd was everywhere. They used Identify to identify the players passing by, but found nothing. "I don't see Todd. Where did he go?" This group of players shouted in the chat. All the roads leading out of the North Gate split up into groups and search. The order was given. The Sunset City mercenaries at the North Gate formed groups of 2 or 3, each looking for a street to follow. At the same time, these mercenaries felt that the situation was urgent. They could no longer care about the mercenary principles that they usually talked about. They all called their friends to find out more information, mobilizing all the resources they could muster. This leveling up caused a lot of excitement. It should be known that the strongest mercenary group in a main city and the largest guild, even if they weren't the same guild, were not far apart. The 100 Battles mercenary group was naturally the strongest mercenary group in Sunset City, but the second largest guild in the city was Fallen Leaves Return to Root. After that, the third guild was also Fallen Leaves Return to Root. Fallen Leaves Return to Root had 2 mercenary groups under its own banner. In addition, most of the other mercenary group leaders had close ties with the major guilds. Naturally, when they called for help, it was naturally the simplest and most convenient way to call for help. Thus, there were indeed many people who responded to the call. Those who were still in the leveling area might not be able to rush back in time, but those who were in the city immediately threw themselves into the cause. There shouldn't be many of them. Unfamiliar faces, mysterious, and there's an NPC among them. This was what the Setting Sun City mercenaries deduced about the group of people from Unsworn Sword. But when combined with the current situation, it was not accurate at all, because the 2 sides were fighting in full swing at the entrance of the dungeon, so how could it be mysterious? Seeing that they were no match for the other side's experts, Shui sighed and shouted, "All right, everyone stop." But right now, they were the ones being chased. How could they stop? Gu Fei and Slim Waist Dance were so focused on killing that they didn't hear him. Unsworn Sword, on the other hand, could hear it clearly, but he was worried that the other party might have some kind of conspiracy. Boundless Mang was someone who had spent a lot of time in PvP, and he had seen too many of these kinds of tricks where the other party pretended to stop and seized the opportunity to take the initiative, so he did not say anything. What a waste of yelling for Shen Shui. He had the heart to continue fighting to the end. It was Ku who pulled him back and shouted again, "Stop fighting, we admit defeat." At this moment, Slim Waist Dance was still focused. But Gu Fei had already stopped. This was a habit that he had developed over the years. He would often spar with others when practicing martial arts. Generally speaking, no matter how focused he was very sensitive to the word "admit defeat." Ku's voice was not necessarily louder than Shui's, but it accurately grasped the words that Gu Fei was very sensitive to. This knife was about to hit his opponent, but he actually stopped abruptly. This was already a conditioned reflex that he had developed over the years. Turning around, he saw Shui smiling bitterly. He pointed to Slim Waist Dance and said, "Please, make her stop." Gu Fei nodded and took out 2 apples from his pocket. He put one in his mouth and threw the other one with a whoosh, hitting Slim Waist Dance's head. Slender Waist Dance covered her head with her hands and turned around very quickly. She heard a crunch. Gu Fei had just taken a bite out of the apple. He pointed to the depth of the water and said, "He stopped. He's already admitted defeat." Slim Waist Dance looked at Shui. Shui was still smiling bitterly. "I give up." After saying that, he waved his hand and said to his brothers, "Remove all the traps." The surviving lurkers stepped forward to remove the traps they had set. Shui glanced at the traps and saw that there were still many traps that were ignored because their owners had already died. He waved his hand. "Step on the others." Several people nodded and stepped on the traps that they had set. When the traps were activated, of course, no one could move. "Brother Shui, you don't have to do this." Unsworn Sword spoke again. Both sides were on opposite sides because of the mission. Now that the other side had admitted defeat and the dungeon door was right in front of them, Unsworn Sword was naturally in a good mood. Seeing the other side's actions, he felt that there was no need to embarrass himself by admitting defeat. He even stepped on the traps that he had set for them. He hurriedly tried to stop the other side from serving him so well. Hey, you're thinking too highly of yourself." Shui hadn't said anything, but Boundless Mang had already opened his mouth and said to Unsworn Sword in disdain, "This is the rule of traps. If they don't step on it themselves, those who died have to come back to collect it. What if they resurrected in Shady Forest City? Wouldn't that be tiring?" Unsworn Sword only had a slight understanding of the rule of traps, so he didn't think too much about it. In fact, it was also because Boundless Mang had more contact with the wretched fellows of eternal life in the flower thicket that he had a good understanding of traps. "Beauty, you're a genius," Shui said as he looked at Boundless Mang. Boundless Mang, however, raised her head towards his side. Shui turned his head and saw that Ku was looking at him. "Cough. Of course, that's only relative to this guild leader," Shui hurriedly added. In order to not let Ku misunderstand, he wasn't afraid to look down on Unsworn Sword, the guild leader. If one were to say that Unsworn Sword was still in a good mood just now, and had some thoughts of roping in an expert like Water Depth, now he had completely dispelled those thoughts. His face darkened as he turned to Gu Fei and said, "I'll go hand in the quest first." But Gu Fei nodded as he munched on an apple. Unsworn Sword was excited. He felt that his legs were trembling as he walked up the stairs. After working hard for several days and sacrificing a large number of brothers and comrades, it was finally time to complete the mission. What kind of reward would it be? Unsworn Sword was just about to enter fantasy mode when Gu Fei suddenly said, "Wait. What is it?" Unsworn Sword was nervous. "It's not time for Todd's trap yet," Gu Fei said. Unsworn Sword turned around and sure enough, Todd was still standing there helplessly with a trap clamp stuck in his foot. The trap had not been removed yet, so Unsworn Sword could only helplessly stop and wait. On the other side, Shueishan's subordinates were also stepping on the traps. When the time was up, the traps would automatically disappear. Gu Fei and the others stood together, while Shueishan and Ku stood not too far away. The group of people stared at each other in silence. Not far away, there were already players sizing them up. This place was close to the East Gate, and the 4 gates were places that the mercenaries of Sunset City paid close attention to. Just because the Han family young master said, "North Gate," they firmly believed that the target was at the North Gate? The mercenaries of Sunset City weren't that honest. Especially after there was news that nothing had been found at the North Gate, the 4 gates became places of great importance. At this time, the battle at the entrance of the dungeon had basically ended. However, on this remote street, a group of people just stood there foolishly without moving. This in itself was very strange. Although what they saw in front of them didn't match the description of few people, mysterious, after closer observation, they found that the unfamiliar face was very much in line. Thus, the guy in charge of leading the team at the East Gate led a few of his companions and began to pretend to be passing by. They had a clear division of labor and were prepared to use appraisal skills when they got closer. Unexpectedly, when they were a certain distance away, one of the players in the team was extremely surprised and shouted excitedly in the channel, "Todd!" This was a mercenary player with a mission. At this time, when they got closer, Todd's name leaped into view like the code name that would appear when a wanted mission was accepted. As for the others in the team, they were guild helpers that had been recruited later. Without a mission, Todd didn't seem to have any abnormalities in their eyes. The information was quickly reported to the organization, the situation, the number of people, the location, and so on. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to be suspicious of them, they began to use appraisal skills. Needless to say, the super experts such as Gu Fei all had question marks on their equipment, and nobody could appraise Thin Waist Dance. On the other hand, Water Depth's subordinates were the elites that he had carefully selected for this trip. Of course, their standards were higher than normal players. After appraisal, these people quickly gave up on the idea of attacking immediately. They felt that it was a good choice to continue to hide their purpose and make arrangements in secret. Unfortunately, they had underestimated the other party's eyesight. Gu Fei, Thin Waist Dance, Boundless Vastness, Water Depth, and even Unsworn Sword were all experienced experts who had seen a lot of battles. They wouldn't be suspicious if they just passed by, and they wouldn't be suspicious if they used appraisal skills while they were passing by. After all, this was very common in online games. What was suspicious was the way they passed by. They pretended to be calm, but it was a little too much. Especially after they found out that the people here weren't ordinary experts, they became even more exaggerated. "Who are you?" Unsworn Sword was the first to speak. Of course, he was most concerned about his mission, and he wouldn't let go of any suspicious clues. Gu Fei, on the other hand, was the first to act. He dashed to the front line in a flash, ready to attack as soon as the battle began. When Unsworn Sword asked the question, they all had different expressions on their faces, but the leaders still replied calmly, "We're just passing by." Water Depth had already noticed that something was wrong with these people, and there was a look of hope on his face. If there was a chance, he would reserve the right to fish in troubled waters. Chapter 392. At this time, the experts of the various mercenary groups in Sunset City had already received news that the target had appeared outside the dungeon. He was quite strong and was urgently calling for backup. Dungeon. Was the target's destination the dungeon? Now that he was already at the door and could enter in 2 steps, what was the point of calling for backup? Many people couldn't help but think so. Especially Invincible, who had finally arrived at the North Gate only to receive this news. Needless to say, he was extremely disappointed. Not only did he not get anything from this mission, but he had also personally dropped a level. He was the most aggrieved out of all the group leaders. "Hi, Invincible." At this moment, someone suddenly greeted him happily. Invincible looked up and was about to turn around to leave, but the person had already shot forward and blocked his way. "100 lives, Jinglin, what do you want now?" Invincible's heart was filled with hatred. However, he couldn't afford to offend the person in front of him. "How is it? Do you have any information? Where are they?" 100 lives, Jinglin asked. "How would I know?" Invincible's words didn't mean what he said. "You have to tell the truth." 100 lives, Jinglin said patiently. "I don't know, can't you guys check it out yourselves?" Invincible's leader shouted. "We don't have as many people as you guys. Come and share your information," 100 lives, Jinglin said. Invincible's leader looked around helplessly, but the mercenary groups that came with him all avoided his gaze. Who in Sunset City didn't know 100 lives, Jinglin? Everyone couldn't hide, so who was willing to stand up for him at this time? Invincible's leaders saw that public morals were degenerating day by day and felt even more indignant. He was no longer in the mood to hide information for his allies, so he said, "They're in the dungeon. Fuck, it's almost over, what's the point of going now? There's a guy in a black mage robe over there, right?" 100 lives, Jinglin asked. Invincible's leader was startled. According to the information, there was indeed such a person over there. Currently, the 2 sides had already started fighting, and this person was extremely fierce. The news just came saying that he had single-handedly taken care of 5 people, one of which was an expert from a certain guild. "There's such a person." Invincible nodded. "Let's go." 100 lives, Jinglin waved his hand, and his comrades followed him. Invincible's leader suddenly felt like watching a show, so he simply followed. At this time, many allied players were pointing at him. Invincible guild leader was furious. "When I went against the 100-era statesmen, they all pretended not to see it and refused to help me. After I had no choice but to compromise, these people stabbed me in the back. How hateful." Outside the dungeon, although the 5 of them pretended to be passers-by, they still aroused the other party's suspicion. Just as Gu Fei and the others were hesitating, the 5 of them suddenly launched a sneak attack. There were orders from above that the destination of this group of people was very likely to be the dungeon, so they had to delay them at all costs. The 5 of them saw that it would take some time for the people at the East Gate to arrive, so they could only grit their teeth and fight. However, Gu Fei was already prepared, and his reaction was very fast. Just as the few of them had this thought, he was the first to make a move. Before the 5 of them could even see clearly, Gu Fei had already flashed in front of them. An extremely valiant dual flame flashed over, and the 5 of them instantly turned into ashes. The people at the East Gate were already rushing over in a frenzy. There were at least 20 to 30 of them. "What do we do?" Unsworn Sword grew anxious. "There's only so many people, what's there to panic about?" Gu Fei said, that's right. Everyone here is a top-notch expert. This kind of small case, we can handle it." Water Depth said as he leisurely stood at the side of the road, giving them space to fight. It was obvious that he wanted to watch the show, and at the same time, he sent a message to his subordinates. Although they were all standing on the trap and couldn't move, their hands were already ready. How long will this trap last? Gu Fei asked Water Depth. Water Depth immediately turned his head. Hey, you, how long will this trap last? That person also turned his head and continued, Hey, you, how long will this trap last? The second person held back his laughter and turned his head, wanting to continue, but Slitwaist Dance had already flashed in front of him and killed him with a single slash. Who's next? Slitwaist Dance asked. All the lurkers lowered their heads, and Water Depth's mouth was wide open, unable to say anything. How long? Gu Fei saw that even though Slitwaist Dance's method was ruthless, it was also quite effective. Knowing that Water Depth wouldn't dare to laugh again, he asked again. It was easy to imagine how depressed Water Depth was. He was one of the 5 most famous experts in the parallel world, but now he was being suppressed to such a state. There's still 30 seconds left. Water Depth replied with a sigh. He had already started the countdown as soon as Todd stepped on the trap. In Tsubasa Sakuratsuka's words, this was the basic quality of a qualified lurker. Just for a while. Once the trap is cleared, you can go to the dungeon. Gu Fei patted Unsworn Sword. Unsworn Sword nodded. Gu Fei had already casually stood at the end of the street. The opponents were only 20 to 30 people, and Gu Fei wasn't stalling for time against them. He had the ability to eliminate all of them, but because he didn't want the PK time to reach 30 seconds, he couldn't be too bold. When these 20 to 30 people finally approached the dungeon from the east gate, the 30 seconds had already passed. Todd's feet loosened, and Unsworn Sword was about to happily walk towards the dungeon door. Gu Fei, Slitwaist Dance, and the others' attention was on those guys at this time. When Water Depth saw that this was the last chance, he immediately signaled with his eyes. Those lurkers understood and raised their bows and arrows to shoot at Unsworn Sword. Todd was following Unsworn Sword, so once the leader was killed, Todd could only stay where he was and wait for further orders. Water Depth regretted that he had only discovered this key point now. Otherwise, with this line of thinking, he could first identify the leader and attack him. Perhaps the other party wouldn't even be able to enter Forest Shade City. Several arrows were fired at once. After killing Unsworn Sword, would his group still have a chance to deal with Todd? At this time, Water Depth couldn't care so much. Anyway, he would just take it one step at a time. Unexpectedly, as soon as the lurkers raised their bows and arrows, Unsworn Sword had already charged out, rushing towards one of the lurkers. With this charge, not only did he avoid the arrows shot at him, but he also stabbed one of them with his sword. This person was unable to move after being hit by Unsworn Sword's charge, and was unable to fly out. Unsworn Sword ruthlessly followed up with another slash, killing this person. At this time, the other lurkers had just knocked their second arrow, and unexpectedly, Unsworn Sword had already charged out again. Just like before, another person was killed. In an instant, Unsworn Sword, who was holding 2 great swords in his hands, became a little more majestic in everyone's eyes. Unsworn Sword very calmly glanced at Water Depth and said, I'm still a guild leader. Do you really think you can kill me just because you want to? Water Depth was very depressed, but he had to admit that he had indeed overlooked this point. In his eyes, Unsworn Sword was like a noob on the street, killing him whenever he wanted. He had completely forgotten that he was also a guild leader of a big guild. Naturally, his skills were also impressive. For example, in a short period of time just now, he had used charge twice. This was a special effect that ordinary warriors would not have. Just as he was at a loss for words, he suddenly felt a light above his head. Looking up, he saw a fiery light drawing a circle. Water Depth understood that this was Gu Fei seeing that they had suddenly attacked again, and immediately attacked him. Dodge! Water Depth pulled Ku beside him and dodged the Skyfall fire wheel. Looking at the brothers on the other side, Slender Waist Dancer and Swift Step weaved in between them. After the fiery red figure flashed, only streaks of white light were left. This time, the lurkers that had brought Sunset City to this expedition had all been wiped out, only the 2 of them were left. Vast Mang, on the other hand, had a "see, I knew it" expression on his face as he spread out his hands towards Gu Fei. Only now did Water Depth realize that the other party had not let down their guard against him at all. His plan to fish in troubled waters had finally gotten him into trouble. On the other side, Gu Fei had chased Water Depth away and immediately charged into the enemy formation with Slender Waist Dancer. With Vast Mang's support from the rear, the enemy, which was 10 times their size, was actually defeated. At this time, Unsworn Sword had already led Todd to the entrance of the dungeon. The moment he stretched out his hand to push the door open, he had mixed feelings. The dungeon door opened, and 2 NPCs that he was very familiar with stood inside. Every time Unsworn Sword brought Todd to the dungeon, there would be these 2 NPCs leading Todd into the dungeon. And this time, apart from these 2 guards, there was also an NPC that looked like a captain. After nodding at Unsworn Sword, he brought Todd into the dungeon. Suddenly, a series of system notifications rang in Unsworn Sword's ears, and he was so excited that he was about to cry. All the players who did not die or fail in the quest received experience and money as rewards. In addition, Reigning the 4 Seas was directly promoted to a rank 6 guild. This made Unsworn Sword so happy that he almost fainted. It was very difficult for a guild to level up. So far, there had not been a rank 6 guild in the parallel world, and the strength of a guild increased with every level up. At rank 1, the maximum number of players was 50, rank 2 150, rank 3 300, rank 4 500, and rank 5 750. The difference in the number of players could be said to be quite large. What about rank 6? Unsworn Sword quickly opened the interface to take a look. The maximum number of players had reached 1050. This level up helped Reigning the 4 Seas increase the maximum number of players by 300, equivalent to a rank 3 guild. At this time, Unsworn Sword's arrogant nature showed itself again. The first message he sent was not to any of his brothers in the guild, but to his guild leader, Against the Current, who was far away in Cloud City. Countercurrent. My guild has just been promoted to rank 6, and this good news is the first thing I thought of sharing with you, haha. Unsworn Sword stood at the entrance of the dungeon and could not help but laugh out loud. When Against the Current received the news, he naturally cursed out loud. In Sunset City, there were countless people cursing out loud. At the same time, they also received the news that they had failed the quest. And of course, the members of Reigning the 4 Seas who were still alive in Sunset City also received the news that they had successfully completed the quest, and naturally, they also cheered thunderously. The most pitiful thing was that among the 20 to 30 people who were fighting with Gu Fei's group on the street outside the dungeon entrance, none of them were mercenaries who had directly accepted the quest, so naturally, they did not have a quest report. At this time, they were forgotten, and no one reminded them. They continued to fight without a care in the world. Each and every one of them turned into PK points for Gu Fei and Slim Waist Dance. Chapter 393. At least these pitiful people weren't completely wiped out. At the end of the day, they still had some judgment. 1/3 of them had already been wiped out, so what could 2/3 of them do? Everyone was a little selfish, and no one wanted to make such a pointless sacrifice. The remaining 2/3 started to retreat subconsciously. When the mercenaries remembered this group of people, they hurriedly sent a message to them. The group of people did not hesitate to turn around and run. Gu Fei and Slender Waist Dance didn't chase after them. After fighting for so long, they had used up a lot of energy. Slender Waist Dance relied on her strong equipment to take on who knew how many attacks. At this time, she was actually on the verge of death. As soon as she stopped, she took out a piece of bread and munched on it. She looked back at Misty Mang and said, "You only know how to take care of him. You didn't even reply to me." Misty Mang paused and said, "Do you need it too?" Slender Waist Dance's insane defense left a deep impression on many people, and over time, they treated her as an undying Superman. So, pros and cons often coexisted. The 3 of them walked towards Unsworn Sword in the dungeon. When they got closer, Unsworn Sword was standing on the steps of the dungeon entrance, grinning and staring blankly. From time to time, he would squeeze out a dry chuckle from his throat. What's wrong with him? Slender Waist Dance, who never blinked when she killed, started sweating when she saw this scene. He's probably sharing the joy of victory with his guild mates. Misty Mang was a little stunned after saying this. She hadn't experienced this feeling for a long time and had almost forgotten about it. Unsworn Sword hadn't entered the extraordinary state where he forgot about himself and could still see the people in front of him. When he saw the three of them, he immediately walked down with a face full of smiles. He wanted to shake hands with each of them, but when he saw Slender Waist Dance holding a knife in one hand and a piece of bread in the other, Misty Mang seemed to be deep in thought, and her eyes weren't on him at all. Unsworn Sword's attempt to get close to the beauty had to go up in smoke. In the end, he could only go up and grab Gu Fei's hand and shake it back and forth. "You've worked hard," Unsworn Sword said with great emotion. "It's nothing," Gu Fei replied calmly. The players who died under his sword would definitely cry when they heard Gu Fei's disapproving tone. There was one person present. Shui hadn't left yet. He was standing at the foot of the wall with Ku. After hearing Gu Fei's statement, he looked up at the sky and sighed. "There are so many perverts in this world. Let's go," Ku said. Water Depth nodded and pulled her hand. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly saw a group of players rushing towards them from the north gate. As they got closer, they could see that many of the players were grandmasters of combat. Is this the legendary 100 Battles mercenary group of Sunset City? Water Depth nodded and took her hand. Deepwater looked at the group of people advancing towards the exit of the dungeon. There seems to be a show to watch. Deepwater's eyes lit up. "Hey." Ku seemed to be dissatisfied. Let's just watch. It's a free show, it'd be a waste not to watch." Shui pulled Ku and waited for the 100 Battles mercenary group to pass by them. Then, he turned around and walked behind them. On the other side of the dungeon, before Sworn Sword could even finish his words of gratitude, the four of them were already attracted by the imposing aura of the team approaching them. Similarly, as they approached, the presence of a large number of grandmasters of combat allowed the four of them to quickly guess the identity of these people. "There's no end to this." Slender Waist Dance quickly gobbled down the bread in her hand. Vast Mang had already eaten a bunch of grapes to replenish his mana. This Unsworn Sword's HP was also incomplete, but he was too busy being happy and didn't have time to replenish himself. At this time, he hurriedly reached into his pocket, broke open the bread, and stuffed the banana into his mouth. Seeing Unsworn Sword use his hands to squeeze the banana into mush with the bread, the three of them felt disgusted. "You can even eat that much?" Slender Waist Dance even took 2 steps to the side. Unsworn Sword didn't care about this. In a few bites, he had already finished the banana in his bread. The people from the 100 Battles mercenary group had already rushed forward. "Brothers, the mission is over. Is there anything else?" Unsworn Sword wiped his mouth as he went forward to talk to the people. In the end, the people in front of them didn't even look at him. One of them pointed at Gu Fei and said to a Grandmaster of Combat in the front row, "It's him." For eyes met. Gu Fei had already guessed who this was. This was probably the leader of the 100 Battles mercenary group, one of the 5 strongmen, Centurion Jingle. Everyone in the 100 Battles mercenary group was a martial arts practitioner. This leader must be even more outstanding. Thinking of this, Gu Fei naturally looked at this person a few more times. This person had already stepped forward and first greeted Unsworn Sword. "This has nothing to do with the mission. We are here to find this brother." At this moment, Unsworn Sword displayed his boldness as a guild leader. In the face of this group that everyone in Sunset City would retreat from, Unsworn Sword righteously took 2 steps forward, looked at Centurion Jingle and said, "Brother Qianli's business is my business." Qianli? Centurion still didn't know Gu Fei's in-game name. Qianli drunk. Gu Fei looked at him and said, "I am Centurion Jingle." Centurion Jingle smiled. Unsworn Sword, who was sandwiched between the two, had already become heir. Just as he was feeling awkward, Gu Fei had already said to him, "President Unsworn, go do your thing. There's nothing here." Yes, go to your thing. Centurion Jingle also said to Unsworn Sword. Unsworn Sword was a little confused by the two of them. After taking 2 steps to the side, he didn't know whether to stay or leave. For a moment, he was still in an awkward situation. Just as Gu Fei was about to open his mouth, he suddenly saw the air around Centurion Jingle thicken. A red figure suddenly flashed out and stabbed towards Centurion Jingle's waist. Then, just as she flashed out, Centurion bent his knees and bent his elbows, his body slightly tilting. Others might not be able to detect the slight change in his posture, but Gu Fei could see it clearly. In that instant, he knew what had happened. Just as he was about to speak, the figure of a slender figure had already appeared. The girl had entered stealth at some point. Because her target was Centurion Jingle and not Gu Fei naturally didn't notice that she was approaching Centurion Jingle. When he saw Centurion Jingle's posture, he realized that something was wrong. He wanted to warn him, but it was already too late. When Slender Waist Dancer stabbed, Gu Fei only had time to shout, "Watch out!" Slender Waist Dancer clearly thought that her sudden stab would be foolproof. When she heard Gu Fei's shout, she actually turned around and said angrily, "What are you shouting for?" She thought that Gu Fei was warning Centurion Jingle, but she didn't know that Gu Fei's "watch out" was actually meant for her. Her stab was exactly in the posture that 100th Era strategist had set up beforehand. He reached out with both hands and grabbed Slender Waist Dance's arm with one hand while the other grabbed her waist. Following that, her waist and legs sank down. Her body seemed to have suddenly become shorter, but she quickly returned to her original state. In the blink of an eye, Slender Waist Dancer was thrown to the ground. The changes were extremely fast. In the eyes of a normal person, Slender Waist Dancer appeared and then fell to the ground. However, Gu Fei saw every move clearly. He let out a long breath and said, "Cloud Dragon appears." "That's right. I didn't expect you to be able to see that." Centurion Jingle smiled and looked down at Slender Waist Dancer. "Beautiful, are you all right? Do you need me to help you up?" "You." Slender Waist Dancer was naturally speechless from anger. She ignored Centurion Jingle's hand and got up on her own. She retreated to the side in a rather awkward manner. Mang Mang came over and helped her to pat the dust off. At this point, everyone's eyes were focused on Gu Fei and Centurion Jingle. The street was silent. "Is it Dragon Fist?" Gu Fei suddenly asked. "Good eyesight." Centurion Jingle smiled. "You are." "My surname is Gu," said Centurion Jingle. "Gu Tian's Gu family?" Gu Fei continued to ask. Centurion Jingle nodded. "How do I address you and Mr. Gu Yaoi?" "He's my father," said Centurion Jingle with a smile. "I've seen him before," said Gu Fei. "I know." As he said this, Centurion Jingle suddenly stopped smiling and became expressionless. "You two fought 10 years ago. He lost to you. You were 15 that year." "That's because the elder helped the younger generation," said Gu Fei. "You don't have to say that." "He accepted his defeat," said Centurion Jingle. "So you know me?" Gu Fei was a little confused. Of course, how could someone in the circle not know the Gu family's 4th young master? "He's a rare martial arts prodigy," said Centurion Jingle. "I wouldn't dare." Gu Fei hurried to be humble, but he still felt strange in the end. Indeed, in the martial arts circle, it wasn't strange at all to know Gu Fei's name. However, he had never seen the person in front of him before. It was a little strange that he could recognize him at first sight. If I remember correctly, we haven't met, right?" Gu Fei could only ask directly. "No." "Then how do you know me?" asked Gu Fei. "I haven't seen you in person, but I've seen your picture," said Centurion Jingle. "Picture?" Gu Fei was confused. "On the internet." "On the internet?" The more Gu Fei listened, the more bizarre it became. When did his picture go on the internet? "Why, you still don't know." Centurion Jingle also began to be surprised. Uncle Gu has nothing to do recently, so he created a website for the Gu family. Your picture is on it. Our Gu family created a website? Gu Fei was greatly surprised. He really hadn't heard of it. "The Uncle Gu you're talking about, are you talking about my father?" asked Gu Fei. Centurion Jingle nodded. The old man has been very leisurely recently. Gu Fei mumbled. That's not necessarily true. Uncle Gu has been very busy recently. As expected of a martial arts practitioner, Centurion Jingle had extraordinary hearing. He actually heard Gu Fei's whisper. You've met him? Gu Fei was getting more and more surprised. Yes, I went to visit your family a few days ago, said Centurion Jingle. Chapter 394. Gu Fei didn't ask why Bai Jingluan was visiting. He didn't need to ask to know. In this era where Kung Fu was on the decline, all the clans and factions that were obsessed with practicing Kung Fu had put aside their ancient sectarian bias, and people often interacted with each other. For example, people from Gu Fei's father's generation often went out with a few friends to hold a forum or tea party. This was considered a more collective activity. Of course, there were also some peer-to-peer private activities. For example, the duel between his father and Gu Fei that Bai Shijinglan mentioned just now was actually a duel between his father and Gu Fei when his father came to the Gu family for a walk. Although this kind of exchange wasn't very formal, and people didn't seem to care much about it, everyone knew what was going on. On a certain day of a certain year, someone went to visit a certain family and defeated someone. And on a certain day of a certain year, someone visited a certain family and lost to someone. So far, everyone had a record of how many times they had fought with someone, and how many times they had won and lost. Although they didn't say it, they were actually very calculative in their hearts. During this process, some people even thought that Kung Fu should learn from advanced sports and hold a Kung Fu league, using a home-and-away round-robin system, or a playoff system for the East and West divisions, and then holding a Kung Fu World Cup every 4 years. The plan sounded good at first, but it didn't work out in the end. After all, Kung Fu was different from ordinary sports. It was about killing. Usually, it was inevitable that there would be some injuries when people casually exchanged moves. If they really fiercely held a large-scale confrontation, the consequences would be unimaginable. So far, Kung Fu could only maintain the status quo and spread in such a narrow circle. Bai Jingluan's visit to the Gu family was nothing more than a common private visit, so Gu Fei naturally didn't ask much. I went to look for you, but you weren't there, said Bai Jingluan. Oh, and then? Gu Fei rarely went home since he became a teacher. I got some guidance from Uncle, said Bai Jingluan. He beat you up. Gu Fei's face was suddenly full of sympathy. No, it was guidance, insisted Bai Jingluan. It was guidance, but I know his style, said Gu Fei. After a moment of silence, Bai Jingluan suddenly said, Damn, I wanted to ask you for some guidance. Yes. Gu Fei nodded and didn't say much. In fact, when Bai Jingluan talked about the battle with his father 10 years ago, he already had a premonition. Saying that he was taking revenge for his father was a little too heavy. It was far from being as deep as it was now. The more appropriate way to describe it was to help his father vent his anger. It was more appropriate to say that he was avenging his father. It was more appropriate to say it. It was to say that he was avenging his father. Of course, Gu Fei was more than happy to fight. He was just waiting for the 100 Lives Classic to speak. Unexpectedly, Master of the Ages looked at him and suddenly frowned. Why did you choose a wizard? Jingluan it, Fei said. By Su I Jingluan right, I said. Su Dvitian with master, with Fu. I Jingluan master to say. It's a long story. If that's the case, I think I'll go to your house when I have time. Don't. Gu Fei was anxious. Here. How ready-made? Beat him to death. Don't hold back. Bai Jingluan was still hesitating. He felt that his profession as a Grandmaster of Combat had too much of an advantage against a Master of Sorcerer in the game. Gu Fei didn't care. He guessed Bai Jingluan's thoughts and smiled. It's just for fun. Don't worry about it. Then, I won't use my skills, said Bai Jingluan. A Grandmaster of Combat skills were all in between punches and kicks. For experts like them, it was a piece of cake to integrate their skills into their own Kung Fu. For example, the emergence of the Cloud Dragon that Centurion Grandmaster used to flip the waist dance could have easily incorporated the Grandmaster of Combat's wrestling technique, hugging throw. Centurion Grandmaster was just being merciful. Seeing that Gu Fei was a master of combat and was at a disadvantage in terms of profession, he decided not to use his skills in the game. Oh, then I won't use my spells either. Gu Fei nodded. Every move of a Grandmaster of combat skills could be used in martial arts. How could a master of sorcerer's spells do the same? Hearing Gu Fei's words, the encyclopedic statesman didn't agree with it. Empty-handed, right? Gu Fei asked as he put his sword back into his pocket. What empty-handed? A Grandmaster of combat's weapon is a glove, slender waist Dance shouted. That's right, but I'm indeed empty-handed. Bai Jingluan spread his hands to show everyone. Indeed, he didn't wear any equipment in the game like a normal Grandmaster of combat. You can use weapons. Bai Jingluan felt that he had a huge advantage in his profession. If he didn't give Gu Fei some benefits, the game would be a little boring. There's no need for that. Let's spar with weapons later. Gu Fei answered. With that, Bai Jingluan didn't have anything else to say. The brothers behind him tactfully retreated a distance to make space for the two of them. On Gu Fei's side, there were only Slender Waist Dance, Vast Mang, and Sword of No Oath. All three of them looked worried. They were just normal players. From a player's perspective, they felt that Gu Fei's most powerful skill was his spell damage that could kill instantly. However, he actually gave up on this powerful attack power to fight with a Grandmaster of combat. They couldn't be blamed for not having confidence in Gu Fei. It was because outsiders didn't understand and were bound to be anxious. On the other hand, the 100 battle mercenary group's faces were full of confidence. They admired Bai Jingluan's martial arts very much. Although the opponent had some skills, they felt that Bai Jingluan would definitely win since he was a master of sorcerer. There was also a third party. Who didn't seem to care about the two who were about to fight. Instead, she looked at Water Depth. Why do I feel that you're the most excited when they're about to fight? I just hope that he'll be beaten to a pulp by Bai Jingluan, said Water Depth. No one announced the start of the fight. The two suddenly took a few steps forward and instantly met in the center. Gu Fei made the first move. He lifted his leg and kicked at Bai Jingluan's chest. Bai Jingluan didn't dodge either. Instead, he formed a claw with his hand and grabbed Gu Fei's ankle. However, Gu Fei's right leg, which he had just kicked out, had already been retracted, and his left leg was the one that bounced up. 100-era strategist hurriedly switched hands, but he missed again. Gu Fei retracted his leg before Bai Jingluan's hand arrived. Bai Jingluan swept his right leg again, and Bai Jingluan still reached out to grab it. In the blink of an eye, Gu Fei kicked 7 times in a row. The encyclopedic strategist also changed his hand shape 7 times, but before he could touch Gu Fei's ankle, he had already retracted his leg and struck out again. He attacked 7 different positions 7 times. Everyone was stunned by what they saw. For outsiders, they could only see the shadows of Gu Fei's legs in that short moment. They didn't even know if his feet touched the ground. It looked like he had kicked 7 times in the air. How is that possible? How can he attack so quickly with his agility? Thin Waist Dance was surprised. Sword Without Oath and Vast Mang naturally didn't understand either. Even the people from the 100 battle mercenary group could only understand a small portion of the higher level. It wasn't the speed that was fast, but the rhythm. Ordinary people didn't know the meaning behind it, so they naturally thought that it was because of the speed. Although Bai Jingluan had blocked all 7 of Gu Fei's kicks, it was becoming more and more difficult for him to attack. By the time the 7th kick landed, Bai Jingluan's hand was already in time. If there was another kick, it would be impossible for him to receive it. Bai Jingluan's reaction was also extremely fast. He immediately gave up on a head-on confrontation and quickly took a step back. However, the 8th kick did not come out. It turned out to be a false alarm. Bai Jingluan let out a long breath. This round of confrontation was a test for both sides. They were testing the depth of each other's strength, and more importantly, they were evaluating each other's true strength. After all, sparring in the game was just sparring. The limitations of the data in the game made it impossible for people like them to perfectly display their strength. Moreover, the two of them had different professions, and adding points to them would create a gap. Therefore, sparring in the game was just like what Gu Fei said, It was just for fun. However, it was still feasible to estimate each other's true strength based on their moves in the game. Bai Jingluan had put in a lot of effort to be able to become one of the top 5 in the game, and he had a deep understanding of the game. From Gu Fei's moves, he could tell that Gu Fei had added all his points to dexterity. In that case, Gu Fei's attack speed was above his. Bai Jingluan mainly added points to dexterity, supplemented by some strength. Although the difference in attack speed due to the addition of agility points in the game was not too obvious, with their continuous attacks, the small difference would accumulate and eventually show itself. Bai Jingluan believed that the difference was the fact that he could not block the 8th move in time after 7 moves. I wouldn't have been in such a difficult situation if I were to fight with my real body, thought Bai Jingluan. But even so, I managed to deal with it. It turns out that he can only kick 7 times in a row. There's no 8th kick. At that thought, Bai Jingluan smiled. Brother Gu, you're indeed a genius. I didn't expect the 9 revolution chain to be able to kick 7 times in a row without moving. Amazing. Gu Fei looked ashamed. I'm really sorry. My rhythm was messed up just now, and I couldn't continue with the 7th kick. What did you say? Bai Jingluan was stunned. Gu Fei patted his pocket with a smile and said, I forgot to put my sword away. Now that I've lost 20 points of dexterity, I have to calculate everything before I use this move, or I'll mess up my rhythm. Chapter 395. Gu Fei's words were especially horrifying to encyclopedic statecraft. Gu Fei could actually adjust the effects of 20 points of dexterity. This kind of body control and reflexes had to be extremely abnormal. If he could really do what he said, then it would not be an exaggeration to call this guy a rare genius that only appeared once in a century. Talent, this was the so-called talent. Although there were a series of famous epigrams such as, hard work makes up for one's lack of talent, and clumsy birds fly early, which told people that they could also succeed without talent. These words were indeed true, but success did not mean that one could surpass talented geniuses. People who thought that they would have such achievements were just wishful thinking that those who had talent would never work hard, as if they were standing at the forefront waiting for others to catch up. This kind of thinking was obviously unreliable. Everyone could do it with hard work, but not everyone could have talent. Bai Xing thought about this and fell into memories for a while. 10 years ago, his father visited the Gu family and actually lost to the 15-year-old Gu Fei. Moreover, he lost completely without any dispute, and there was nothing that could be said about it. And his father did not hold a grudge for losing to a young opponent at all. However, from then on, he would mention this Gu Fei from the Gu family from time to time, praising him profusely. Look at that Gu Fei from the Gu family. From then on, this became the most commonly used sentence pattern when he taught Bai Sheng. Every detail of Kung Fu, Gu Fei became the role model of Bai Sheng. Like a ghost, he was always attached to his father, looking down at him from a bird's eye view. His father hoped that Gu Fei would be his son's role model, but there was clearly a problem with his way of education. Not only did Gu Fei not become the role model of Bai Sheng, but his father's mood would become bad whenever he heard this name, and he would be very depressed. Fortunately, 100 Lives Classic was not like many children who simply gave up after hearing too many such comparisons. Instead, he was motivated to work harder and practice diligently every day. At that time, he had already made up his mind that one day he would go to the Gu family alone, challenge this Gu Fei, and defeat him. Next time his father said, "Look at that Gu Fei from the Gu family," he could casually reply, "Gu Fei? What is that? Is it that defeated opponent of mine?" Bai Sheng did not know how many times he had imagined such a scene. Every time he thought about it, he felt excited, so he would work harder. Of course, this wish was very childish. Gradually, as he grew older, imagining this scene no longer gave Bai Sheng any motivation. But as he grew older, he said, "Sheng Sheng Sheng Gu Sheng Sheng and Sheng Gu Sheng 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 Gu 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 Sheng Gu 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 Sheng Sheng Gu Gu Sheng 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 Gu Sheng 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 and Gu." It's a pity that you don't have the talent of that Gu Fei from the Gu family. Otherwise, you wouldn't be any worse than him. In the face of such a situation, If you were Bai Sheng, would you feel anything other than depressed? Bai Sheng was really afraid that he would have to live under the shadow of Gu Fei for the rest of his life, so he continued to train harder and harder. Until one day he easily defeated his father, making his father's eyes light up every time he mentioned Gu Fei. I didn't expect you to improve to this level. I just don't know how much Gu Fei has improved in the past 10 years. Maybe you can go look for him. His father's words were quite implicit. Looking for him actually meant that he could go and challenge Gu Fei to learn from each other. Of course, he did not have any grudges about the defeat 10 years ago, but he was happy to have a son who could help him hold his head high 10 years later. Of course, Bai Sheng had been looking forward to this day for a long time. It was a pity that he went to the Gu family, but Gu Fei was not there. After fighting with Old Man Gu, Bai Sheng felt that he still had a lot of shortcomings, so he temporarily postponed his plan to challenge Gu Fei. He did not expect to meet Gu Fei in the game today. Bai Sheng acted as if nothing had happened, but he was actually very surprised. Frankly speaking, because of his defeat with Old Man Gu, Bai Sheng was no longer full of confidence when he fought with Gu Fei. After losing the protection of confidence, the shadow that existed for 10 years immediately came out to harass him. After being beaten back by Gu Fei's 7 consecutive kicks, he quickly began to find reasons to explain himself. This could also be said to be the manifestation of the shadow in his heart. He really did not want to lose to Gu Fei at all. However, the adjustment of 20 points of dexterity that Gu Fei mentioned next really surprised Bai Sheng. Especially when it came to the consecutive kicks that Bai Sheng used just now, Bai Sheng believed that if he were to adjust it himself, he would need some time to practice to find the rhythm that was suitable for his current attack speed. However, if this guy could do it in one go based on his feelings, then the gap in this point was very obvious. Bai Sheng was still lost in his thoughts when he suddenly heard Gu Fei ask him, "Did my dad use this move against you?" Bai Sheng came back to his senses. Oh, then let's continue. As Gu Fei spoke, he suddenly took a diagonal step forward. That step did not seem to be stable, but his body suddenly fell to the other side. Layman would find it strange, but Bai Sheng could see it clearly. Jade-breaking steps. He himself was proficient in this footwork, and as he saw Gu Fei's body fall to the ground, he took a second step to support himself and then twisted his waist. It's the black dragon swings its tail. Bai Sheng thought to himself. He knew that the way this move was used, the 2 steps were like accumulating strength, and the twisting of his waist was to completely stretch his body. The following kick would definitely be shockingly powerful. The main purpose of this move was not to hurt the enemy, but to break the enemy's balance. The follow-up move was the real killing move. The encyclopedic strategist had a clear understanding of Gu Fei's move. Naturally, he would not take it head-on. He leaned to the side to avoid the sweep, and his right leg was ready to kick Gu Fei down with a black dragon emerges from the water. Unexpectedly, Gu Fei twisted his body and kicked out a kick that was completely different from what encyclopedic statesman had imagined. Gu Fei's leg flashed and did not follow the route that he had expected. This was simply sending his face towards his opponent's leg. Bai Sheng was shocked. In a moment of desperation, he could only raise his arm to block it. As their hands and feet collided, Bai Sheng immediately noticed that Gu Fei's leg was moving upward along his arm. Oh no. Only then did encyclopedic strategist understand what was going on. He wanted to pull his arm back, but he was too slow. Gu Fei's leg was in the air, and his other leg followed closely behind. Gu Fei's left and right legs, one above and one below, kicked encyclopedic strategist's arm. It's not the black dragon swings its tail, but the black dragon twisting pillar. This thought just appeared in Bai Sheng's mind. He didn't expect his judgment to be so wrong. Despair filled 100-era strategist's heart. All he could do was try his best to break free, but he ended up flinging Gu Fei's body away with that one swing. Gu Fei twisted his body in midair, but he did not look embarrassed when he landed. He looked at Bai Sheng and said with a smile, "You're quite strong." Bai Sheng felt like he had just woken up from a dream. This is a game. How can one's strength be strong and weak at will? For example, he could not unleash the explosive power of a black dragon swings its tail at all as a wizard. However, he had clearly used the black dragon swinging its tail, but the 100 Lives statecraft could not help but believe it. In the end, it turned into a black dragon twisting pillar in an instant. Such a superb technique. The 100 Lives statecraft suffered another heavy blow. Apart from that, he finally understood the meaning behind Gu Fei's 2 attacks. The first time, he kicked 7 times in a row to test Bai Sheng's attack speed and reaction. This time, he used the black dragon twisting pillar to test Bai Sheng's strength. What about him? What did he see from these 2 exchanges? Bai Sheng broke out in a cold sweat when he thought about it. Chapter 396. The 2 of them made a big fuss as if they were about to engage in an earth-shattering, world-ending battle. But now, it looked like they were just putting on a show but without substance. Although the battles in the game were not as terrible as flesh and blood flying everywhere, generally injuries would see blood, which could be regarded as an intuitive visual reaction to the damage suffered by the players. Therefore, as long as it was a PK, there would be blood after a few rounds, whether it was their own blood or the enemy's blood. For example, people like Gu Fei and Bai Jingluan, who were throwing punches and kicks back and forth, could not see the blood and could not see the outcome. They suddenly felt that the fight was very low class. Most of the people with this idea were ordinary players. Most people in the 100 Battles mercenary group could understand a little bit of the spirit of the fight. But at this time, the 2 sides were not the only players watching. Some other miscellaneous people found out that Bai Jingluan was fighting here and immediately spread the news throughout Sunset City. In Sunset City, any one of Bai Jingluan's underlings could fight 1, 2, or 3 of them. When Bai Jingluan made a move, it was like finding a little fun in life. Don't misunderstand him, he was very serious. At this time, it had been a long time since he had established his position and image in Sunset City. It had been a long time since the 100 Era's statecraft made such a serious move. 1 to 10, 10 to 100. When many people heard the news and came, Gu Fei and Bai Jingluan were fighting fiercely. However, the current situation disappointed the players who had come to watch the battle. In their eyes, at this time, Bai Jingluan had completely taken the initiative, and the opponent had no strength to fight back. Everyone was looking forward to the soul-stirring scene of Bai Jingluan being taught a lesson. But as soon as they came, they saw him throwing punches and kicks in high spirits. Everyone wanted to cheer for Gu Fei, but they were afraid that the fists of the 100 Battles mercenary group would greet them. In fact, frankly speaking, the 100 Battles mercenary group was not so tyrannical in Sunset City, but they also did not behave modestly and cautiously. With their strength, they did not need to pay attention to anyone, and that was exactly what they did. As a result, of course, no one would have a good impression of them. In addition, in terms of mercenary business, the 100 Battles mercenary group was too competitive, so strong that others had no temper. Players who lost in the competition with them subconsciously felt that they had been bullied. This was the origin of the current image of the 100 Battles mercenary group in the minds of Sunset City players. In fact, if you asked a player on the street when the 100 Battles mercenary group had bullied them, 99% of the players would not be able to answer. The feelings towards the 100 Battles mercenary group were complicated. The specific connotation could be compared to the feelings of the poor towards the rich when the gap between the rich and the poor was too big. These amateurs felt indignant that the 100-year scholar was once again in the limelight, while many of his 100 Battles mercenary group's members couldn't see through it, thinking that he had the upper hand, and their faces were brimming with joy. Only Bai Jingluan was not feeling. As he walked, Gu Fei did not retaliate at all. He only paced back and forth. Even encyclopedic strategists could tell that Gu Fei had at least 4 perfect opportunities to counterattack. He had even strengthened his defense to prevent Gu Fei from taking advantage of his weakness. In the end, Gu Fei did not seem to have any intention of winning. He just walked back and forth. It was just a simple step, but Bai Jingluan was not angry. He could see that Gu Fei was using the same footwork as him. When Bai Jingluan took the first step, Gu Fei had already taken the second step. When he took the second step, Gu Fei happened to take the third step. Since Bai Jingluan discovered this, he had changed 4 sets of footwork: arrow step, sliding step, hidden step, long mountain step, All of them matched the footwork of the fire dragon fist that Bai Jingluan was performing. As a result, without exception, Gu Fei saw through them. No matter how the encyclopedic statesman strode, Gu Fei could steadily step on the most appropriate position. It was as if the two of them were performing a ballroom dance as they walked at a predetermined pace. As for Bai Jingluan's attack, Gu Fei could only hit the air after every step. Bai Jingluan was really helpless because he knew the reason why Gu Fei could do this. Apart from the fact that he had the same understanding of footwork and fist techniques, Gu Fei's movement was faster than his. It was not like attacking, which was just a little faster, but Gu Fei was much faster. For him, he had enough time to see Bai Jingluan's steps clearly and then move. This was created by the system God, and Bai Jingluan could not change it. In addition, the fire dragon fist that Bai Jingluan performed emphasized that the footwork was the first, the hand was the supplement, and the body was the second. Gu Fei took advantage of this and saw through the 100 Lives Statecraft's footwork. Then he made the most reasonable movement, and the 100 Lives Statecraft's attack was naturally neutralized. How could Bai Jingluan not understand these principles? He was just unconvinced. He hoped to make some changes in his footwork and hoped that Gu Fei would make a wrong judgment. In the end, it was already the fourth set of footwork, but Gu Fei's steps were still as accurate as ever. Bai Jingluan almost forgot to attack with his hand. His eyes were also looking lower and lower as he stared at Ou Yangming's feet on the ground. Ou Yangming's feet suddenly stopped moving. Bai Jingluan was ecstatic. Did Gu Fei finally not know how to react? He raised his head and wanted to punch, but he felt that something was wrong. Gu Fei was also looking at him and said faintly, "You should change your footwork." Bai Jingluan felt dizzy. He only paid attention to the movements under Gu Fei's feet and unknowingly walked the fourth set of footwork, long mountain steps, from the beginning to the end. He naturally stopped after he finished walking. He had not realized that he should use the next set of footwork, but when he saw that Gu Fei's feet suddenly stopped moving, he immediately became happy. He actually forgot that it was because there was no movement under his feet, which was why Gu Fei stopped moving. Bai Jingluan was completely dizzy. At this moment, Gu Fei calmly pointed out, and Bai Jingluan immediately felt very embarrassed. At this moment, even if he used the fifth set of footwork, he had already lost Ou Yangming. What was the point? The others had no idea at all. They only saw Bai Jingluan chasing fiercely all the way while Gu Fei kept dodging. But when he stopped in the blink of an eye, Gu Fei still looked calm, while Bai Jingluan seemed to be in so much pain that he wanted to die. There was a lot of discussion, especially among the players of Sunset City, who at this moment had a mysterious aura about Gu Fei. During this time, countless appraisal skills had been used on Gu Fei, but of course, they couldn't identify anything shocking. As for Gu Fei's skills, they had been watching Gu Fei stroll in the middle of the field since they arrived. Those who were not experts could not see anything. Bai Jingluan wanted to continue, but he really did not know how to do it. At this moment, Gu Fei was actually in a difficult position. When Bai Jingluan attacked him continuously, he did see a lot of opportunities to fight back. Several times, he was even confident that he could take down Bai Jingluan with one blow, but that was only if he had enough strength. Unfortunately, as a mage, what he lacked was power, so he could only watch helplessly as opportunities slipped away one after another. Bai Jingluan thought that he did not want to make a move, but in fact, Gu Fei wanted to make a move, but he could not. If he did not have enough strength to penetrate Bai Jingluan's defense, he might be taken down in an instant. Although he had faced opponents who were far stronger than him in the game, and Gu Fei could use some skills to counterattack, he could not do it now. First of all, Bai Jingluan was not an ordinary person. He was also a combat expert who had very good control of strength, so it was not easy to deal with him. Second of all, Bai Jingluan's Fire Dragon Fist was a martial art that used softness to overcome hardness and borrowed strength to attack. It would be too overpowered to try to borrow strength from such a martial art. Gu Fei did not look down on Bai Jingluan that much. From the moment Bai Jingluan chose Fire Dragon Fist to deal with him, Gu Fei knew that Bai Jingluan had expected that Gu Fei did not have enough strength and could only win through tricks. Therefore, he simply chose this quick and flexible fist technique. If Bai Jingluan kept using this kind of fist technique against Gu Fei, Gu Fei really could not think of a way out as long as he did not make a mistake. However, if he were to give Gu Fei a chance to make a fuss, Bai Jingluan probably would not be so stupid. Gu Fei suddenly realized that there were quite a lot of limitations when he wanted to spar with a real martial artist in the game. The two stood there in silence for a while. The audience was a little impatient since they did not see any blood. Normal people did not dare to make a sound, but why would Slender Dance care about that? He immediately yelled at Gu Fei, "Stop dilly-dallying. Quickly kill him. You should go offline." Gu Fei had not even said anything when she shouted. Bai Jingluan suddenly reacted. He looked at the time and immediately started jumping. "It's already so late, why is there no reaction?" Many people in 100 Battle Mercenary Group immediately panicked. "Let's stop here for today. I'll find you again if there's a chance." After Bai Jingluan hurriedly called out to Gu Fei, he had already led his large group of mercenaries towards the direction of the safe zone. What's going on? Gu Fei was still at a loss when he received a friend request from Bai Jingluan. After choosing to accept, he sent a message. "What's wrong?" "Night class. Night class." Bai Jingluan replied. Gu Fei immediately understood. Morning class and night class were the two main periods of time for martial artists to practice. Since they needed to sleep at night and work during the day, they could basically squeeze out these few hours. Life in the modern world was very stressful. Practicing martial arts could not be used to make a living. It was a waste of time and effort. It was no wonder that even the descendants of martial arts families did not like it. Gu Fei thought inside. He did not have the habit of having morning and night classes at home, but after he started working as a teacher, he started to have this kind of schedule. Recently, with the Reigning the World quest, Gu Fei's night classes were somewhat neglected, and he would hastily finish them every day. Fortunately, today's quest was successfully completed. Looks like I should have a good night class too. Gu Fei thought. Chapter 397. No one would have thought that a PK that caused so much commotion would end like this. Both sides of the PK didn't draw their weapons, no blood was seen, and in the middle of the fight, one of them suddenly had something to do and left. Even the legendary, "Stop when the fight is over," wasn't this excessive. Bai Shijing and the others left very quickly, and the rest of the people could only cast their dissatisfied eyes on Gu Fei. Gu Fei didn't pay attention and turned back to his small group. Slender Waist Dance couldn't help but have a look of disdain. She was used to big scenes, so she didn't even want to say that she and Gu Fei knew each other. Unsworn Sword was a bit better. He kept saying, you've worked hard," but in his heart, he was also muttering. What kind of medicine did this drunk killer, who was famous for being ruthless and killing people like Scything Flax, eat today? He actually dilly-dallied with someone for so long. He didn't fight much, but he spoke a lot. This wasn't drunk killer's usual style. Gu Fei and Bai Shijing were both muttering. Their kung fu family's trivial matters didn't need to be shouted, so the onlookers didn't hear what they were talking about. They just felt that it was very embarrassing to watch such a PK. "Leader Unsworn, the mission is over, I'll be going first." Gu Fei said to Unsworn Sword. "Huh, didn't you say you were going to wash your PK points?" Slender Waist Dance was surprised. Just now, when she sent those people away, she and Gu Fei agreed to wash their PK points together, but in the blink of an eye, he changed his mind. "I just remembered something." Gu Fei said, "Let's go." Take care. Unsworn Sword quickly responded. When Gu Fei walked a few steps, he suddenly remembered something and hurriedly shouted, "Do you want to wait for you to go back to Cloud City together, Brother Qianli?" "No need, you guys go first." Gu Fei said. Now that the quest was over, of course, there was no need for everyone to agree on a time. Gu Fei estimated that these all-nighters would probably rush back to Cloud City to show off their level 6 guild. After greeting Unsworn Sword, Gu Fei turned around and saw Xin Shui and Ku still standing at the foot of the wall. Their expressions were the same as the surrounding audience, and they also felt that this battle was not very satisfying. "What are you waiting for? Be careful, that Slender Waist Dancer will come and stab you." Gu Fei walked over and said to Deepwater. "Say, I'm afraid of her." Depth of Water expressed his disdain. The scariest thing about thieves was their ability to go into stealth. However, Water Depth, who had the ability to counter stealth, had always looked down on thieves, even if it was the thin waist dance. Are you two very close? Ku looked at Water Depth, then looked at Gu Fei. She was not used to someone who had just killed countless of their brothers, but in the blink of an eye, came over and chatted with them as if nothing had happened. Not close. I've just slashed him before. Gu Fei finished speaking and left. Deepwater was so angry that he gritted his teeth and said to Ku, "Look, you get stained by the company you keep. People who hang out with that idiot for a long time are all so annoying." Is Sword Demon also annoying? Ku said. That's why I've always said that Sword Demon is a talent. Water Depth said. Thank you. Suddenly, someone behind him replied. Deepwater hurriedly turned around and saw Sword Demon, Han Family Young Master, and a few others from Child Elite Group, as well as Drifting, a total of 7 people walking out from a street. It wasn't just them, all the players in Cloud City had already rushed over from various streets. It couldn't be helped, they weren't familiar with the road. Ku is here too. Han Family Young Master first greeted Ku, then happily said to Water Depth, I thought you suffered a double loss. Not bad, you managed to keep an eye on your wife. Water Depth could only grit his teeth in depression. On the other side, Sword Demon looked at the crowd that had already dispersed, but he didn't see Gu Fei's figure. When did the battle end? He asked Water Depth. Just now. Water Depth said. So you're saying that Aeon Strategist is already dead? These people were still very confident in Gu Fei. But Water Depth said. What? Everyone was shocked. If Aeon Strategist wasn't dead, then the one who died was, of course, Gu Fei. No one died. Halfway through the battle, Aeon Strategist had something to do, so he left first. Water Depth announced regretfully. Didn't he get insta-killed by Qianli in 2 or 3 moves? These people had seen many of Gu Fei's battles. Basically, once he made a move, it would be insta-kill. He never had any suspense, unless he was out of mana. Hearing Water Depth use the adjective halfway through the battle, could it be that Aeon Strategist and Gu Fei had been entangled for a long time? They fought for a long time, and both of them were empty-handed. Water Depth said, What's going on? Everyone was puzzled. Sparring between people of the same profession? Yu Tianshiming's guess was still relatively close to the truth. Then all the more they shouldn't go easy on him. Everyone said, they weren't people of the same profession, so of course they wouldn't understand that the environment of the game was actually not a suitable stage for Gu Fei and the others to spar. They could only try their best to be fair, and Gu Fei's mana damage itself was an extremely unbalanced existence, so of course he wouldn't use it. Maybe it's because Qianli's PK value just happened to reach 29. They had always considered the problem from the perspective of the game, so brother, you made this guess. Everyone nodded. This is all thanks to our brother Water Depth. Aeon Strategist really should thank you. Where's Aeon Strategist? Let him show his hospitality as a host and treat you to a meal and drink some wine. The Han family's young master said. Eat my ass, drink my ass. Water Depth had thousands of words, but they all turned into these 2 indignant words. He turned and pulled Ku. Let's go. Let's go. Ku was old friends with Sword Demon and Han Family Young Master, so she didn't forget to say goodbye. After pursing her lips and saying something, she left with Water Depth. On the other side, many of the brothers of Unsworn Sword had also arrived. They huddled together, and in the blink of an eye, they were already in a state of excitement. Unsworn Sword grinned as he walked towards Han Family Young Master and the others. The mission is finally over. Han Family Young Master and the others already knew what their reward was. After all, Yu Tianshiming was a member of Reigning the World. The reward for leveling up the guild could be said to be very generous, but for ordinary guild members, they didn't feel any personal benefits at all. Therefore, the most excited about this reward was definitely the core members of the guild like Unsworn Sword. Although the guild was made up of hundreds of people, in reality, it was just the personal wealth of these people, especially the guild leader. For example, If Unsworn Sword were to sell his level 6 guild as a commodity, the buyers would definitely flock to it. In the game, there were too many people who wanted to achieve hegemony, and having a powerful guild was the simplest and most effective way to do so. This was especially true for some of the latecomers. Guild building was the accumulation of hundreds of players over a long period of time, and there was no quick way to achieve it. Therefore, if there was such a trade, they definitely wouldn't miss it. On the trading forums of the parallel world, there were already messages asking to purchase guilds in many main cities. Currently, it was said that there had already been deals, and the price was extremely high. A small level 2 guild could already sell an exquisite piece of equipment, and the price of a level 3 or 4 guild skyrocketed. As for level 5 guilds, there were at most 2 or 3 in each city, and they were priceless. It was said that there were already professional players trying to make money in this way. Those who had the financial resources to create their own guilds and organize people to complete guild quests day and night. Those who did not have the financial resources to do so would run around the major guilds or the guild construction teams of other professional capitalist players, acting as a professional construction team for the guild. A new group was born just like that. Of course, Unsworn Sword didn't have the intention to sell his guild, but just thinking about it made him feel great. No wonder he was grinning from ear to ear. Everyone, since the quest is over, don't be in a hurry to go back. Let's all go to the tavern later. Brother, I'll treat you guys. Today, let's not go offline until we're drunk. Unsworn Sword said loudly. Very few people would refuse this kind of invitation. Amidst the laughter, the players in Cloud City began to ask around for directions to the tavern. When Unsworn Sword saw Gu Xiaoshang, he immediately abandoned these experts and walked towards Gu Xiaoshang with a shake of his head. After Gu Fei went offline, he gave a call to his family. After exchanging a few words with his father, he asked about the Gu family's situation. What Gu Fei found strange was that Bai Jingluan was in a hurry to go offline for his evening class, but he didn't expect that a large portion of his 100 Battles mercenary group would also run away with him. When he fought with the people who blocked his way, Gu Fei vaguely felt that they should have received proper martial arts training. The Gu family actually accepted so many disciples. This made Gu Fei very surprised. If it was so easy to find so many disciples, how could martial arts have declined so much? So as soon as he went offline, Gu Fei gave his family a call and asked his father about the Gu family. They can't be considered disciples of the Gu family. Old man Gu sighed. Then, the Gu family is working with a bodyguard school over there. They are responsible for teaching close combat skills. Old man Gu explained. I think they received quite proper training. Gu Fei said. Of course. Do you think the Gu family has an undeserved reputation? Don't look down on them just because their father lost to you, and now their son lost to your father. Your thinking is no different from bullying the weak. What's wrong with you? Is it because I haven't taught you a lesson in a long time? Get your ass back here this weekend? That's not what I mean. Gu Fei hurriedly interrupted. What I mean is, he's not just casually giving them 1 or 2 pointers. He's training them in a very proper manner. How can we guarantee the morals of such disciples? Old man Gu sighed. There's no guarantee, then this? Gu Fei didn't know what to say. The rules of selecting disciples were not set by any sect. This was a rule that all Kung Fu practitioners should abide by since it was passed down to this day. It represented the responsibility and obligation to maintain social stability and harmony in practicing martial arts. Old man Gu still sighed deeply. These kinds of things have been happening more and more in recent years. There's no other way, everyone has to eat. Chapter 398. In silence, Gu Fei and his dad ended the call. Everyone has to eat. It sounded funny at first, but it was indeed a very difficult problem that martial artists had to face. Practicing martial arts was, in fact, a very luxurious activity. At the very least, it was necessary to keep up with daily nutrition. Practicing martial arts was physically demanding, and it consumed a lot of energy every day. It also required more nutrition than ordinary people. They couldn't starve and sweat every day, could they? But in today's society, any ordinary family could do it. However, the more advanced ones, such as some scientific nutritious diet methods, some scientific ways to strengthen the body, exercise equipment, and so on, were far from what an ordinary family could achieve. The country often claimed how much money was needed to train an athlete. This was not a joke. The purpose of training athletes was to achieve good results. It was not like raising pigs and dogs, and having 3 meals a day was enough. This process required a lot of specialized talents, skills, and equipment, all of which required money to maintain. It was the same for practicing martial arts. If it was just a hobby for fun, then it would be fine. But for professionals like the Gu family and the Gu family, who had made practicing martial arts their life's work and pursuit, how could they just do it for fun? Take Gu Fei as an example. Since he started practicing physical fitness when he was a child, professional technicians, such as nutritionists, physiotherapists, and so on, had been inseparable from him. How could he afford to hire such professionals if he had no money? Besides, all kinds of weird professional training equipment were custom-made. How could he afford it if he had no money? In addition, the gym and the training field needed a lot of space. How could a working-class family living in an 18-story commercial house afford it? On the surface, Gu Fei looked like a down-and-out grassroots PE teacher. However, if one really thought that Gu Fei was a PE teacher just to make a living, then they would be gravely mistaken. This was just an errand that he had inexplicably found in his search for the path of martial arts. If Gu Fei really relied on his identity as a PE teacher, who couldn't even open a cram school, he wouldn't even be able to afford the equipment to play in the parallel world. The status of the Gu family in the Kung Fu world had something to do with their business. They had already entered a virtuous cycle. They made money to support the expenses of the family, and practiced martial arts to maintain the family's reputation in the circle. But more and more children were more interested in making money than practicing martial arts. When it came to Gu Fei's generation, he was the only one left. Every family had its own problems. Most of the martial arts families were struggling to make ends meet. The Gu family was not short of money, but there was a serious talent gap. The elders in the family were discussing whether it was time to change the rule of, let them do what they like. In today's colorful world, there was too much information flow. It was already very difficult for children to focus on one thing. Hobbies also needed to be cultivated. Before Gu Fei left home, he heard that his uncle was going to raise the 2 children of his eldest cousin brother. Before Gu Fei left, he saw the room that was specially prepared for the 2 children. There was a big Kung Fu character on the door. When he opened the door, there were 18 soft whips. The clothes rack on the left was gone, and it was changed to a weapon rack. The antique vase on the right corner was still there, but there was a tyrant spear stuck in it, and the bright red tassel was exposed outside the vase. On the wall facing him was a picture with exquisite calligraphy. There were only 2 words, Kung Fu. On the left and right side of the Kung Fu were the 2 children's beds. They were all bunk beds, and there was nothing under them. There was no ladder, only a rope. On the left and right walls were paintings. On the left were the best moves of the 36 Gu family fist, and on the right were the best pictures of the 72 Gu family sword. There was also a big bookshelf. Gu Fei went to look through it, and it was all about Kung Fu. Of course, there were some children who didn't like to read books, but they liked cartoons and video games. His uncle had long since prepared for this. Both the cartoons and the games were all about close-range combat. I don't believe that growing up in such an environment will not develop interest. His uncle said proudly. His uncle had 2 children, but they were not interested in Kung Fu, which made him lose face. This time, he was prepared to use his grandson to save his face. Gu Fei remembered that when he was tormented like this, his 2 nephews were only a little more than 1 year old, not even 2 years old. This kind of training was quite effective. The 2 boys were fighting every day, and their faces, bodies, and arms were full of scratches. They had not even officially started learning Kung Fu. If they really started learning, Gu Fei would probably suffer internal injuries. It was said that his family had prepared for this. There were all kinds of medicine for treating bruises and injuries. Recently, he heard that they were discussing hiring a professional doctor, preferably one who knew both internal and external medicine. If that was not possible, they would hire 2. This was treatment that Gu Fei did not have in the past. Although this was funny, Gu Fei could not laugh. Even the Gu family had this indescribable awkwardness, let alone other small families that even had problems eating. With these thoughts on his mind, Gu Fei went offline early that night for his evening classes. He was also a little absent-minded. The next day he entered the game at the same time. Thinking that he did not have to rush around today, he felt a lot more relaxed. Sunset City was also bustling with people at this time. It was the peak time of the day. As Gu Fei walked down the street, all he could hear was the discussion of yesterday's dispute. Surprisingly, there wasn't much talk about the confrontation between cloud computing and the Sunset Mercenary Alliance. Instead, there were more people talking about the battle between Gu Fei and the 100 Eras Jingles. Did you hear? Yesterday, someone from Cloud City PK with Bai Jingluan. I heard. It seems like there was no winner in the end? It seems that Bai Jingluan said he had something to do and left first. Hey, don't tell me he couldn't beat him, so he pretended to be a coward? Hey, I think so. Many players thought that Bai Jingluan couldn't beat Gu Fei, so he found an excuse to leave. Hearing this, Gu Fei could only smile bitterly. He thought to himself, why is the 100 Lives Classic so unpopular in Sunset City? How did he get along? Gu Fei didn't think about it. In Cloud City, he was also a murderous demon king, and he thought he was popular. Hey, guild leader Heartless, you guys haven't left yet. Gu Fei wandered across 2 streets, and suddenly found Sword of No Oath and his 2 brothers, Feng Xing, were strolling on the street like tourists. So, Gu Fei greeted them. The 2 turned around and saw Gu Fei. They quickly greeted him, Brother Qianli. You haven't gone back yet? It's rare to run so far, so let's take a walk. The 2 laughed. In fact, Feng Xing saw that the Grandmaster of Combat in Sunset City was so outstanding and wondered if there was any rare Grandmaster of Combat equipment on the market, so he forgot to go back. Most of the players in Cloud City, after a happy gathering last night, had returned home in groups of 2s and 3s. Brother Qianli, are you ready to go back? Heartless Sword asked. A little more. Gu Fei smiled, but he was actually thinking about the unfinished fight with Bai Jingluan yesterday. Although it wasn't satisfying to fight to the fullest in the game, meeting someone who knew how to fight was better than bullying normal players. Today, he went online to look at his friend list. Bai Jingluan was not online. Gu Fei guessed that his life as a kung fu coach was not as leisurely as his PE teacher. Then Brother Qianli, you go ahead. We'll go over there and take a look. Heartless Sword and Feng Xing said goodbye to Gu Fei and went elsewhere. Gu Fei felt that Unsworn Sword's mood today was obviously not as high as the day before. Logically speaking, he should still be in a state of excitement after completing the quest yesterday. However, his expression was so calm. This was not his style at all. Gu Fei wondered what had happened. Gu Fei felt strange but did not ask. Coincidentally, someone in the mercenary channel asked him about the situation. Gu Fei asked casually, and a few people laughed. It turned out that Heartless Sword was unusually excited after completing the Reigning the World mission. After drinking with everyone in the tavern for a while, he went offline before everyone else. At that time, everyone was puzzled. It was not until today that Brother Yu brought the news. It turned out that Heartless Sword, this idiot, could not get excited even after drinking. He actually went to the game forum and announced something about the number 1 guild in the parallel world and proudly announced how they had completed the large-scale mission. As a result, this flaunt was immediately met with ridicule on the forum. Unsworn Sword was so excited that he thought this quest was exclusive to them. He had forgotten that this guild quest chain was a reward for the guild's previous competition. As long as one was the champion of the competition, they would receive this quest chain. Although the content of the mission was different, the final reward was the same. All the guild players who completed the mission would be rewarded with experience and money, and the guild level would increase by 1. As the Reigning the World mission was an expedition across main cities, it took many days. On the other hand, some main cities' guild quests could be completed in one go. Although there were failures, Unsworn Sword's claim to be the first rank 6 guild in the game was a huge joke. In the few days that he had been busy, 3 guilds had successfully completed the reward quest and reached rank 6. Among them, there were 2 guilds that had passed through the main city. One of them was Cloud Tower of Moonlit Twilight, while the other was Waterside City's Waterfront City's Sky and Water. Heartless Sword had been paying attention to his own mission and did not pay attention to the dynamics of the world. This was a huge joke. Rank 6 guilds were no longer the focus of discussion. In the past few days, the players on the forum were in full swing discussing the replacement of the 5 roaches. At the end of the competition, although many people had leveled up to the original 5 roaches of level 41, the game's ranking was based on the number of people's experience, so it was still clear who was stronger. The original 5 roaches were still the top of their respective professions, the top 5 in the game. But recently, 2 of the 5 roaches had fallen from the leaderboard due to a drop in levels. They were Deepwater and Southblade. As for the 2 new roaches, they were already the hot topic of discussion. Both of them were mages. One was called Strange Pupil, and the other was very familiar to the players of Cloud City, Against the Current. Butterfly Knot. This chapter is a transition. It will be a new chapter starting tomorrow. Everyone, give me a round of applause. Chapter 399. The Mage's experience farming speed was starting to show its power at this stage of the game. There were actually 3 mages in the top 5. This meant that other than rogues and grandmasters of combat, the champions of the other classes couldn't even make it into the top 3. The top 5 was just a symbol. After expanding the list, one would realize that among the players at the top of the leaderboard, grandmasters of combat were still rare. The other classes were relatively even. The mage class was a new force to be reckoned with, making up the majority of the current high-level players. Against the Current. This was a name that Cloud City players were familiar with. It had quietly risen to the top of the game during this period of time. This was also one of the reasons why Unsworn Sword wasn't in a good mood today. His guild was indeed 1 level ahead of Singing with Wine with a player limit of 300, but he himself was a complete loser compared to Against the Current. After Azure Blade fell from the top of the warrior leaderboard, Unsworn Sword also moved up a rank. He was currently ranked 11th on the overall warrior leaderboard. This was a very awkward ranking because there was a saying in the game, top 5, top 10, top 7. The top 5 referred to the top 5 players of all classes, the legendary top 5. As for the top 10, it referred to the top 10 experts of each class. They were also very popular. Unsworn Sword, on the other hand, was ranked 11th. Perhaps the difference between him and the 10th was just a little bit of experience, but it couldn't be helped. Just this little bit put the 2 of them into 2 different worlds. Unsworn Sword was the dividing line between these 2 worlds. Those in front of him were all first-rate experts in the eyes of the players, while those behind him were all quasi-experts who were a level lower than them. As for himself, he was the representative of depression. All the players ranked 11th were the representatives of gloom. This was because there were 7 main classes in total. These were the 7 of the top 5, top 10, and top 7. These 7 leaders of gloom were often summarized by the players on the forums. However, they weren't existences that people looked up to, but existences that were ridiculed by the masses. This was especially so after Unsworn Sword made a huge joke out of being called the number 1 guild in the parallel world. In the latest update of the 7 of the 7, they were ranked first. The fact that Unsworn Sword could still laugh when he met Gu Fei showed that his mental fortitude was quite good. Naturally, the mercenary channel was filled with mockery towards Oathless Sword. Apart from Brother Yu, whose rank was relatively average, the others were all ranked in the top 10. This was especially true for Sword Demon. He had already reached the 2nd place on the Thief leaderboard. As the one in front of him was the warrior with money, Slender Waist Dance, who was clearly an aloof existence on the level leaderboard, everyone agreed that as long as Slender Waist Dance didn't die, it would be very difficult for Sword Demon to continue climbing up. Other than that, there was also Unscathed in Battle. After Jian Nanyu's disappearance, he also squeezed into the 2nd place of the warrior ranking. Yutian Shinming and Han Family Young Master were more average. One was ranked 7th, while the other was ranked 8th. Moreover, these two players' rankings had risen due to the death of someone in front of them. It was unexpected that so many top 10 players would lose levels in one day. The forum was full of discussion. However, Brother Yu had already brought back some information. Jian Nanyu's group of 7 was a powerful mage called Flaming Clothes. He was originally ranked 4th on the Mage leaderboard and was a famous character in Waterfront City. If that's the case, then it's very likely that everyone in his group was one of the top 10 experts. It's possible that because their group was wiped, someone from the top 10 dropped. Unscathed in battle guessed. Everyone agreed with this statement. It was a pity that the other characters didn't have any distinctive characteristics. This made it difficult for an expert like Brother Yu to ask around. Speaking of which, that guy also said that he would wait for us in Waterfront City. Yutian Shenming said, "We have to be careful. If our group is wiped, the top 10 will have to be updated. We can't always cause trouble for the players on the forum." Unscathed in battle said, "It's no trouble." Brother Yu laughed. "This is where our fun lies." Brother Yu obviously understood the mentality of the players on the forum who loved to summarize the top 5, top 10, and top 7. Jian Nanyu must have heard that our mission has been completed. Maybe he's anxiously making arrangements in Waterfront City. Should we stay in Sunset City for a few more days and make him anxious? Yutian Shenming's mischievous mentality came. Everyone laughed. However, from a strategic point of view, this was a good way to strike at the enemy's spirit. Wait in Waterfront City? Then wait. In any case, everyone's days in Sunset City were just as leisurely. Let's see how long Jian Nanyu can wait. Jian Nanyu was indeed waiting. However, these guys from the child elite group were thinking too highly of themselves. Jian Nanyu wasn't waiting for them at all. When Jian Nanyu discovered that these experts were delusional enough to think that he was harboring ill intentions towards them, he did not expose them. This was because the situation was really good for him. Therefore, he even spoke according to their wishes, making them even more convinced that their guess was correct. In reality, Jian Nanyu's target was only Gu Fei. Jian Nanyu was already a professional player among the professional players who robbed for a living. He would no longer get involved in street and water robbery and extortion. Those players, after getting other people's equipment, still had to go out and sell it themselves. One look and you could tell that they were small craftsmen. Jian Nanyu, after painstakingly operating for so long, already had a certain seller's market. People would often come to him because of his reputation. Of course, the things that came to him were often not ordinary. They were often things that couldn't be found on the market. For example, someone posted on the forum to show off his unique equipment, skill scroll, or something else. Such a person would often become Jian Nanyu's target. Many customers came to him and specifically asked for this kind of equipment. As for how Jian Nanyu got it for him, the other party didn't ask and only paid. Of course, it was a large price. Those low-end robbers earned money by selling stolen goods. As for Jian Nanyu, it could be said that he mainly sold his labor costs. This was a bit like a bounty hunter. Some people even felt that they were very cool, as if they weren't a group of people who maliciously exploded equipment. However, Jian Nanyu was very self-aware. Among the original 5 roaches, Slender Waist Dancer was the #1 money warrior in the game. His reputation belonged to the entire online gaming world. Deep Waters was the leader of a guild. His guild was the strongest in Shady Forest City. 100 years of experience led a mercenary group and was an existence that suppressed guilds. As for Drifter, as his name suggested, he wandered back and forth between the main cities. The people who had seen and recognized him were the most. As for Jian Nanyu, he was clearly the most low-key of the 5. He didn't have a guild or a mercenary group. Every day, he behaved like the most ordinary player and never caused trouble. Even in Linshui City, there weren't many people who knew him. He worked hard to rush to the position of 5 roaches to lay the foundation for his career. When everyone didn't know each other and didn't trust each other, the title of 5 roaches was naturally a symbol of strength. He relied on this to win over many customers. Now that his career had stabilized, Jian Nanyu didn't care too much about the identity of 5 roaches. It was just that his foundation was too hard in the past. After relaxing, he still hadn't been surpassed. Jian Nanyu's original goal was to rush to become the #1 player in the game. It was because the money warriors in front of him were too fierce that he didn't achieve his goal. However, it allowed his experience points to be higher than the remaining 3, and he wasn't surpassed for a while. Of course, deliberately dropping a level was a very simple and effective method, but Jian Nanyu was afraid that it would destroy the strong impression he had established in front of his customers, so he didn't use it. This time, he really lost a level and he still felt a little regretful. After dying in Linshui City, Jian Nanyu had already begun the next step of the arrangements. The people were still the same, but this time, it was the home ground, so it was much more convenient. First of all, to come to Linshui City, one had to take a boat, and the system boat was always accurate to the second. Therefore, waiting for people to ambush in Linshui City had unique advantages. Every day, there were only a few hours from Sunset City to Linshui City. Jian Nanyu only needed to wait at the dock during this time. He definitely wouldn't miss it. The problem was that although the target was only Gu Fei, he didn't know how many companions this person would have around him. Jian Nanyu gave up on Linshui City and rushed to Sunset City for this reason. He hoped that the other party would give him some opportunities in the chaotic scene of the last stage. He didn't expect to be seen through from the beginning. As a result, he was played in circles. He went to Sunset City, but he didn't even see the face of the target. Moreover, there was news from Sunset City today that it seemed that it was that guy who had a street PK with Sunset City's 100 Generation Statecraft. Rumor had it that 100 Generation Statecraft couldn't beat the other party, so he used the excuse of going offline and left. Linshui City and Sunset City were neighbors. Some players from Sunset City would occasionally come to Linshui City to eat beach grilled fish and drink beach wine. Therefore, 100 Generation Statecraft, the #1 celebrity in Sunset City, had been publicized by these guys in Linshui City. In the mouth of these Sunset City players, 100 Generation Statecraft was a top 5 cockroach? This wasn't the most frightening thing. What was frightening was this person's PK skills. A Grandmaster of Combat who specialized in close combat had never been defeated in PK. This sounded a bit nonsense. If you were defeated in PK, of course, you would have died long ago and lost a level. The reason why the top 5 cockroaches were strong to this point was because they had never been defeated in PK and lost a level. However, 100 Generation Statecraft's experience was very different. According to the Sunset City players, since this guy's low level, it was common for him to fight 1 against 10, 1 against 20. During that time, 100 Generation Statecraft stood on the street with a bitter smile on his face, surrounded by players who fell to the ground and rolled. This had always been a frequent classic scene. This was how 100 Generation Statecraft's reputation was built. In the hearts of Sunset City players, whether 100 Generation Statecraft was a top 5 cockroach or not, he was equally terrifying. He was a symbol of invincibility. And such a person had lost to the video mage. It seemed that he had to re-evaluate the strength of this mage. Jian Nanyu thought seriously. Chapter 400. In Sunset City, Gu Fei wandered around for a while and cleared a few PK points. Finally, Epitaph Jinglin came online. Epitaph Jinglin's message arrived at the same time. Continue. The arena, Epitaph Jinglin said. Gu Fei knew this kind of place. In Cloud City, he and Feng Xing fought there. It was usually near the combat dojo. Every main city was similar in some aspects. After asking for directions from a passing player, Gu Fei came to the arena next to the combat dojo. Epitaph Jinglin was already waiting there. One look and you could tell what a professional was. Back then, when Ji Hao fought against Feng Xing stood straight in the middle of the arena with his arms crossed. That was so cool. But in fact, nothing was more exhausting than acting cool. Although this didn't exist in the game, it was definitely a problem of awareness. Look at Epitaph Jinglin. He was walking around the arena as if he had nothing to do. From time to time, he would lift his shoulders and twist his ankles. Loosening the body in the game didn't have much use, but it would bring some relaxation to the mind, which was extremely effective. This was the difference between a professional and an amateur. Epitaph Jinglin also saw Gu Fei at this time. He twisted his neck left and right and said, "Coming." Yeah. Gu Fei nodded and raised his hand. With a whoosh, he teleported in front of Epitaph Jinglin. Hey, you can't use this when fighting." Epitaph Jinglin was dumbfounded. Of course. Gu Fei smiled. "Shall we continue from yesterday?" Fists and kicks are more or less the same," Epitaph Jinglin said. "Let's compare weapons?" Gu Fei nodded. It was hard to tell who would win if they fought with fists and kicks. Epitaph Jinglin couldn't do anything to Gu Fei, and because of Gu Fei's strength, he couldn't form an effective attack against a professional like him unless Epitaph Jinglin made a mistake, which was quite boring. But it was a different scene when it came to weapons. Weapons were equivalent to increasing the attack distance and range of both sides. This way, the more space there was, the more changes there would be. In this kind of situation, strength might not be the deciding factor, so Gu Fei felt that it would not be as awkward as punches and kicks. "What do you use?" Gu Fei asked. 100 Era's Grandmaster took out a long stick from his pocket. "Coiling Dragon Staff?" Gu Fei asked. 100 Reincarnation Jingluan nodded. Dragon Fist was the general name of their sect. Although the internal branches were still named after fists, in reality, there were some that focused on leg techniques, and some that used claws, which might not really be fist techniques. Among them, the Coiling Dragon Fist was mostly a set of weapons, such as the Coiling Dragon Staff, the Coiling Dragon Spear, the Coiling Dragon Dual Blades, and so on. "What about you?" Bai Jingluan asked Gu Fei. "Well, what do you want to see?" Gu Fei asked him. The 100 Lives Classic was depressed. However, his father had been whispering the name Gu Fei in his ears since he was young. How could he not know? This person was indeed a genius, and the variety of martial arts he was proficient in was simply beyond human imagination. As a professional, the 100 Lives Classic couldn't understand how this guy could master so many things at the age of 25. To be honest, he wasn't even 25 yet. 25 was Gu Fei's current age, and he had learned all these things even earlier than that. Now that he was being asked to choose, how stylish. From the bottom of his heart, the 100 Lives Classic was still envious of Gu Fei's talent. He also hoped that he could have the opportunity to say such a line. Unfortunately, he could only grit his teeth and say, "Use your strongest." "The strongest? They're all the same," Gu Fei said. Tears streamed down 100 Lives Classic's face. In the end, he said, "Use your sword. I've wanted to experience the Gu family's sword techniques for a long time." But Gu Fei nodded cheerfully and drew his sword. The Dark Knight Streamer Sword. The Dark Knight Streamer Sword's design was exquisite, and the sword's light was obscure and low-key. However, the halo floating on its surface was unique to Supreme Weapons. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation. His image was instantly different. 100 Lives Classic didn't want to fight anymore. "Make your move." Gu Fei didn't look down on 100 Lives Classic's small wooden stick just because he had a supreme weapon in his hand. He gave a sword salute and said to 100 Lives Classic. 100 Lives Classic also held his stick and bowed. Then he suddenly swung his stick from below. Gu Fei dodged to the side. That's right. Facing 100 Lives Classic's attack, he could only choose to dodge. He couldn't use his sword to block it. His opponent was an expert. Even if his strength was far inferior to a warrior's, his technique was not on the same level. Once his strength was suppressed, 100 Lives Classic might take the initiative and gain the upper hand. After dodging the stick, Gu Fei immediately retaliated with his sword. The stick was longer than the sword. 100 Lives Classic raised his hand to block. Gu Fei wanted to stab 100 Lives Classic, but he had to move forward a little. 100 Lives Classic's wrist retracted, and the stick fell from his hand. He was originally holding the end of the stick, but now he was holding the tip of the stick. He swung his arm to the side, dodging Gu Fei's sword, and smashed the stick down on Gu Fei's head. Gu Fei also slashed to the side. He adjusted the direction of his sword and continued to stab 100 Lives Classic. However, 100 Lives Classic had already expected this change. He changed the direction of his stick midway and hit Gu Fei's sword. Naturally, Gu Fei didn't want to cross swords with his weapon, so he quickly withdrew his sword. In a short moment, both of them changed their moves. Those who knew the ropes would be amazed, but those who didn't know the ropes would not be able to imagine the difficulty. After fighting with Gu Fei yesterday, 100 Lives Classic had some understanding of his style. At this time, he said calmly, "What did you see?" Gu Fei usually didn't use his ultimate move. He seemed to be happy to see what his opponent had first. "Your stick technique is not bad," Gu Fei said honestly. 2 simple moves showed that 100 Lives Classic stick technique was quite solid. However, that was all. Gu Fei didn't find it refreshing. 100 Lives Classic obviously knew his own level. After yesterday's fight, he already knew that there was a huge gap between him and Gu Fei. His confidence in winning today's weapon duel was already very dim, and he simply wanted to experience Gu Fei's strength. "What about you?" So the encyclopedic strategist said, "Show me some of your special skills to open my eyes." "Wouldn't that be too fast?" Gu Fei said. 100 Lives Classic was hurt again. "Don't be so confident. It's not certain yet," he said loudly. His fighting spirit, which had been dormant, was suddenly ignited. "That's good, I'm coming." Gu Fei shouted, his sword already raised. The obscure glow of the dark moonlight sword suddenly blossomed with Gu Fei's hand movements. This sword didn't take the side path and went straight for the main path, stabbing towards encyclopedic statesman. "This is an ultimate move." 100 Lives Classic curled his lips. "It's just a few more sword moves." As he thought to himself, he casually hit the sword with his stick. At this moment, Gu Fei's sword suddenly disappeared. 100 Lives Classic was shocked. How did it suddenly disappear when there was a bright light in front of him? It only disappeared for a moment, and before 100 Lives Classic could react, the sword appeared in front of him again. However, the tip of the sword was not far from him. 100 Lives Classic wanted to dodge in a hurry, but he suddenly felt a chill on his neck. Gu Fei's sword was already there. 100 Lives Classic was at a loss. There was clearly some distance just now, and he was confident that he could dodge in time. How did it suddenly reach his neck? 100 Lives Classic suspected that Gu Fei had used teleportation. However, this suspicion only lasted for a moment. Although Gu Fei frequently made him grit his teeth in anger, he believed that the guy wasn't that immoral to use a skill from the game to compete in martial arts. Gu Fei didn't hurry to retract his sword. He looked at 100 Lives Classic and smiled. "Not bad, right?" 100 Lives Classic clenched his teeth. He wanted to ask what was going on, but he held back and thought about the series of changes that happened just now. This wasn't a fantasy game, but a change in the sword technique that Gu Fei used. Suddenly, 100 Lives Classic's eyes lit up, and he looked back at Gu Fei. "Spring is born, summer is grown, autumn is harvested, and winter is hidden?" The name was very long, but it was a very famous sword technique of the Gu family. Sure enough, Gu Fei nodded. "The sword flower is born in spring?" 100 Lives Classic asked. Gu Fei nodded. "The disappearance is, winter is hidden?" According to the sequence of events, it should be summer after the birth of spring, but the disappearance seemed to be winter hidden. Sure enough, Gu Fei nodded again. "And then there's Elder Xia?" 100 Eras Jingluan thought of how the sword had suddenly appeared by his neck. Gu Fei nodded again. "Then what about autumn?" Gu Fei's attack seemed to only be 3 details, and 100 Lives Classic couldn't think of the 4th. "Autumn is when you're dead." Gu Fei retracted the dark flowing light sword. 100 Lives Classic was gloomy again. "I'm done." 100 Lives Classic put his poplar stick back into his pocket. It turned out that Li Du had been playing with him all along, and he couldn't even block a single ultimate move. Gu Fei didn't say anything. He wasn't modest, and he didn't comfort him. What was the point of comfort when it was the bare truth? Modesty. Why was he being modest when he was already at this level? Bolt saying, "No, no, I'm quite slow, was no different from cursing someone. So Gu Fei put away his sword and asked 100 Lives Classic a question that he was more concerned about. I heard that you're a coach in a bodyguard school now? 100 Lives Classic looked a little unnatural. They were all in the circle, and everyone knew what it meant for him to do that. But he could only helplessly say to Gu Fei, I just want to use martial arts to support myself. Gu Fei was silent. They had all experienced the pain of learning martial arts but not having much use for it. But 100 Lives Classic's ideal was more direct. He sincerely hoped to live by martial arts. As for Gu Fei mulled over it. It sounded nice to say that he had an ideal, but in fact, he had nothing to do. There are some professional players in this game. Have you come into contact with them? Gu Fei suddenly asked. Butterfly not. It's a magnificent 400 chapters. How many chapters will this book have? Butterfly not looks longingly at the future. Chapter 401. Professional gamer? That question made encyclopedic strategist despise Gu Fei deeply. The online gaming market was so popular that there were more professional gamers than martial artists. How could he not have come into contact with them? Gu Fei's question was simply an insult to his intelligence. Therefore, he did not answer at all and looked at Gu Fei as if he was looking at an idiot. When Gu Fei saw that encyclopedic strategist despised him as if he had found a chance to take revenge, he knew that his question was stupid. However, he only smiled and said, I think you can be a professional gamer. It's quite reliable to use martial arts. What? Are you encouraging me to be a robber? There were many types of professional players. The vast majority of them were hard-working little bees. Then, there were merchants who sold equipment and items. These were all things that ordinary players could do. If you wanted to rely on martial arts, then you needed to be very strong. Currently, the only way to make a living was to rob others. There was no other choice. Encyclopedic strategist was indeed not as good as Gu Fei in terms of martial arts, but when it came to games, he was not as naive as Gu Fei. Of course not, Gu Fei quickly said. If he did not explain, encyclopedic strategist would look down on his own character. Look. Gu Fei patiently explained his thoughts to him. This game market is quite big, and there are more and more professions that make money from it. Take those robbers, for example. Everyone despises them. Think about it the other way around. If you specialize in robbing these robbers, you can get rid of evil for the people, and you can also make money. 100 Era's strategist thought that Gu Fei had a brilliant idea, so he patiently listened to him. However, he immediately despised Gu Fei after he finished speaking. Regular robbers have a wide audience. All the players in the game are their customers. Look at me now. My customers are so limited. Where can I find so many robbers? Of course it's difficult for you to do it. How can you make money if it's not difficult? Gu Fei criticized. Then why don't you do it? Encyclopedic strategist retorted. Gu Fei thought about it again and finally hurt encyclopedic strategist. Bro, I don't lack money. Encyclopedic strategist burst into tears. That's right. How could the Gu family be short of money? Moreover, it was said that Gu Fei was the only one in his generation who practiced martial arts. This meant that the whole family was supporting him like a lord. You're trying to make a living, brother. It's not that easy. Gu Fei tried to enlighten him. I'll ask around and think about it, eccentric scholar said. Gu Fei saw that he was being perfunctory, so he threw out another idea. Also, those players who were robbed must be very sad and indignant. Who knows, they might even be willing to pay you to deal with those robbers. Hearing that it was a good idea, 100 Era statesmen's eyes lit up, but they soon dimmed. You're talking nonsense again. Who wouldn't want to take revenge? The problem is that these kinds of people usually don't show their faces in public. Don't they know that a bunch of people are gnashing their teeth at them? Look, this is the market. Most people can't find him, but you have to drag him out. You're an exclusive, brother. Gu Fei said. Eccentric scholar was going crazy. If others can't find him, why can I? I'm just a normal person. Brother, you have to use your resources wisely, Gu Fei said. Eccentric Scholar began to think. At this point, he was officially moved by Gu Fei's words. Come, I'll introduce you to some people, Gu Fei said. Who? Fierce people. They're all fierce people in the online gaming world, equivalent to me and, your dad in the martial arts world, Gu Fei said. Eccentric Scholar's face was covered in tears again. Gu Fei actually put him and his dad together. But from Gu Fei's vague words, Eccentric Scholar understood that Gu Fei was going to say, me and you, but it didn't stand up to scrutiny. Because Eccentric Scholar was a nobody in the martial arts world, and the Gu family was still under his dad's name, Gu Fei had no choice but to change his words. Although it was impolite, there were no elders here, and everyone was young, so he didn't care so much. Eccentric Scholar felt sad for a moment, but he didn't say anything. He followed Gu Fei and asked, What fierce people? What fierce people? Fierce people were, of course, the brothers from the child elite group. Although Gu Fei was much stronger than them in PK, when it came to gaming, whether it was knowledge or connections, these people were the real experts. This was the first time Gu Fei had called everyone together. The experts all gave him face and went to the tavern they had agreed on. They came first, but Gu Fei and Eccentric Scholar were already waiting. The eyes of the people who came in one after the other were wide open. They recognized Eccentric Scholar. Weren't the two of them PK on the street yesterday? Why were they sitting together like this today? Gu Fei introduced each person to Eccentric Scholar. This was Sword Demon, that was Han Family Young Master, this was Brother Yu, and that was Unscathed in Battle. It's an honor to meet you. Eccentric Scholar couldn't help but get up to greet people. The people of Sunset City thought that Eccentric Scholar was an arrogant and despotic existence. In fact, martial artists like him had some traditions in their bones and paid more attention to etiquette than ordinary people. This was something that only people who had been in contact with people would know. After repeatedly saying, It's an honor to meet you, Gu Fei finally couldn't help but ask, You really have heard of me? Gu Fei felt that Eccentric Scholar should be jackals of the same lair as him. As for these online gaming celebrities, there was no such thing as hearing of them. Eccentric Scholar immediately despised him. I've never heard of them before. Now that I've been playing for so long, how can I not know these names? Instantly, everyone at the table felt comfortable from head to toe. They felt that they were all playing martial arts, and Eccentric Scholar was much more likable than Gu Fei. The atmosphere was very cordial, and Gu Fei was left alone in a desolate corner. Where's Yu Tian? Gu Fei didn't care about this. He only saw that everyone was here, but he didn't see Yu Tian Shenming. The four brothers looked at each other and said in unison, No one is with him? Then the four of them were silent. Han Family Young Master calmly raised his glass and took a sip. Of course he's lost. Yu Tian Shenming was indeed lost. He wasn't originally alone, but he suddenly saw Drifting on the street, and Drifting didn't see him. This was an opportunity that Yu Tian Shenming was looking forward to. He immediately went alone and followed Drifting, looking for a chance to kill him. Although they had done missions together, Yu Tian Shenming didn't think of Drifting as a friend. He was someone he hated. If he hated someone, he would kill him. It was a game, and there weren't so many rules. Plus, Yu Tian Shenming was a top expert. But Drifting was clearly in the market. He weaved through the crowd and couldn't find a chance for Yu Tian Shenming to kill him. Thus, along the way, in the surging tide of people, he lost his target, and he himself also lost his way. Fortunately, there were many people in the city, and he could ask if he didn't know him. Coincidentally, Gu Fei sent a message, so Yu Tian Shenming asked for directions to the tavern. Asking for directions in a game was actually very simple. In a world with a large map like the parallel world, everyone would carefully remember the coordinates of the places they often went to. Normally, when asking for directions, everyone would just tell you the coordinates. But as a person with no sense of direction, Yu Tian Shenming hated this most accurate and effective method. He wanted to use the kind of cross the street, turn left, cross 3 more streets, turn right, walk straight, turn left method that would make most people's hair stand on end. Thinking about it, there weren't many people who could give directions like this, so Yu Tian Shenming had a hard time asking for directions. He stumbled along the way. Finally, after meeting the same player 3 times and asking for directions 3 times, the player was touched by the poor Yutian Shinming who held a notebook and asked for directions 3 times. He dropped what he was doing and personally brought Yutian Shinming to the tavern. Yutian Shinming was extremely moved, but he was still acting cool. "Thanks, brother." Yutian Shinming said, "My name is Yutian Shinming. If there's anything in the future, just say my name." It was a pity that the other party was an uncle and probably hadn't played the game for long, so he hadn't heard of this legendary character's name. Moreover, in his eyes, Imperial God Ming was just a little brat, so he calmly smiled and said, "All right. Don't wander around the city by yourself in the future." The uncle warned him and left. Yutian Shinming found their seats and sat down with a dignified air. It had been 40 minutes since the last unscathed in battle had sat down. The sword demon, who couldn't hold his liquor, was staring blankly. Gu Fei even skipped the step of introducing the 100 Realms strategist to Yutian Shinming. He slapped the table and said, "Everyone's here. Let's talk business. Let me catch my breath first." Yutian Shinming had been walking for a long time. His body wasn't tired, but his mind was long exhausted. Gu Fei held back his anger and waited for Yutian Shinming to gulp down 2 mouthfuls of wine before asking, "Can you say it now?" Yutian Shinming keenly noticed that Gu Fei's hand was already in his pocket, so he quickly nodded. This brother, 100 Realms strategist, is preparing to make a living as a professional player. Gu Fei said, Hey, don't make decisions for me." 100 Realms strategist hurriedly shouted. "Didn't he say he was going to introduce a few powerful people? How did things progress so quickly? I haven't even thought about whether or not I want to do this business." Gu Fei glanced at him and ignored him. The remaining people had already begun to speak. "Professional player, what do you do for a living? Rob people?" Sure enough, everyone felt that it was a waste for someone with 100 Realms strategist skills to not be a robber. "Of course not. I'm going to rob people," Gu Fei said. "There's nothing to be gained from that." When the gods of the online gaming world opened their mouths to analyze, it was indeed very different. Professional robber players mostly rely on traps and ambushes. Their equipment is usually very ordinary, so there might not be any loot. But they're very hated, aren't they? Maybe someone will be willing to pay a bounty to destroy them. Gu Fei said. Brother Yu immediately smiled, a confident smile. "Well, that requires a very large and accurate source of information." So Gu Fei once again introduced Brother Yu in detail to 100 Realms strategist. "The king of intelligence, Brother Yu. He's very experienced in intelligence." Chapter 402. Brother Yu continued to smile, but his confident smile had turned into a burning smile. "This is indeed feasible." Brother Yu began to speak with fervor and assurance. At present, in the forums of the main cities, there are already people shouting out the message of buying people to help them get revenge. It is said that some mercenary groups have begun to try to accept this kind of task. At present, the main difficulty is the intelligence. It is not easy to capture the whereabouts of such people. What? There are already people doing this business. Unparalleled Jingren thought he would be exclusive, but he did not expect that someone was already trying. For a moment, he was a little discouraged. There will be development only when there is competition. "Brother Yu, go on," said Gu Fei. "In fact, it is a bit too limiting to just focus on the robbers. In general, it is to PK for others, isn't it? This kind of work is actually quite common now. I dare say that if you go to the mercenary building in Sunset City now, you can get a lot of it. It is just that the target of this kind of thing is usually a master, and it is easy to leave endless conflicts, so many mercenary groups are not willing to take it. But with the strength of your 100 Battles mercenary group, it is impossible that you have not come into contact with this kind of task, right?" asked Brother Yu. Unparalleled Jingren coughed and looked a little embarrassed. "I have. This kind of task generally pays quite high. If you insist on doing it, I think it can already reach the income level of professional players," said Brother Yu. Unparalleled Jingren was silent for a moment, but still confessed. The problem is that it is difficult for us to do this kind of task here in Sunset City. But Brother Yu was puzzled. Because most of the target of the task is me. Even a person as calm as the Han family young master couldn't help but spit, but then he naturally waved his finger to wipe his mouth. You guys go on. I see. Brother Yu also wiped his sweat. On second thought, it was not like this. Unparalleled Jingren was in the limelight in Sunset City, and even the guild could not compare to his mercenary group. Even if he had not done anything to anyone, just this jealousy alone could prompt a lot of people to want to hire people to kill. Why don't we just change to another main city? Unscathed in Battle's way of thinking was rather simple and direct. Actually, the main problem is that we don't know who's right and who's wrong in this kind of dispute between players. It's not easy to help. 100 Eras Jinglas said. That's right, so the main target is those robbers. Gu Fei said. At first, the experts were astonished by 100 Years strategist's attitude, but after Gu Fei's words, they immediately realized that the two in front of them were the same type of people. Their morals and values were basically the same. Even though they were very strong, they would never bully the weak. This was a principle that they would never violate. Up until now, Gu Fei had never taken the initiative to PK anyone. His 100 Battles mercenary group rarely killed anyone in battle. In this regard, he was even kinder than Gu Fei. Gu Fei was still very much like a player at this time. He was never merciful, and he had a lot of PK points in his pocket. It made people's expressions change when they talked about it. Is that so? Brother Yu's train of thought was obviously met with a failure. Of course, he did not have the ability to distort other people's view of life, so he could only go along with the other's train of thought. If it's only against the robbers, it will be a lot of effort. I may not be very confident in intelligence regarding this group of people. Gu Fei saw that the gathering of such a group of experts did not seem to bring any positive factors. Instead, they were able to analyze the many difficulties, causing the encyclopedic statesman to shrink back. He hurriedly knocked on the table and said, "Now is not the time to make a long-term plan. I asked you guys to come because I know you have a lot of friends. See if there is any business on hand to recommend." The experts suddenly showed expressions of grief and indignation. They were all legendary figures in the game. If there was a problem that they couldn't solve themselves and needed to spend money to hire someone, wouldn't their reputation be ruined? Just as they felt that Gu Fei was being ridiculous, Han family young master suddenly said, "Yes, there is one." The others were startled but quickly thought of something. "Hurry up and say it," Gu Fei said, then suddenly froze. "Wait a minute. You're not asking him to PK me, are you?" Gu Fei felt that with Han family young master's viciousness, the possibility of this was too high. Han family young master only looked at him with disdain, and then turned to 100 Years strategist and said, "South Harmony, this guy is a robber, and he's looking for trouble with us. Why don't you help us deal with him?" But 100 Years strategist immediately nodded. He really is a strong person. The experts all thought to themselves. Even if South Harmony dropped a level, no one dared to look down on him. What was a difference of 1 or 2 levels in the game? The parallel world made it so difficult to level up so that the difference between players would be as small as possible. South Harmony dropping a level didn't affect his status as a top-tier expert. On the other hand, the encyclopedic statesman did not hesitate at all when he heard Jian Nanyo's name. It was as if he had heard a request to kill the ant at the door. His powerful aura was indeed extraordinary. "South Harmony," Gu Fei repeated. However, he still had some impression of this shield-wielding warrior from the things that happened in the past 2 days. As for the price, Brother 100 Years, how are you going to charge? Han family young master asked. I don't really understand. You are all experts in the game, how would it be appropriate for you to help me? 100 Years strategist's tone was sincere, making the others feel uncomfortable. They dared to say that they were top-tier experts in front of anyone, but in front of Gu Fei's group, they didn't have the confidence to do so. No one knew better than them how terrifying people like Gu Fei could be in a PvP match. Han family young master looked at the others. This was everyone's problem, so he obviously didn't want to pay for it alone. We can deal with this ourselves, Unscathed in Battle said. Although he wasn't really prepared to deal with it himself, this was a bargaining chip that could be used to bargain. So you don't need my help? 100 Years Strategist was honest. Unscathed in Battle didn't know how to respond. Don't worry. Gu Fei quickly spoke. There's someone who's just here to watch the show. This business is definitely yours, Gu Fei said as he looked at Han family young master. Of course, he also knew that the top-tier experts in front of him would find a way to solve any trouble by themselves. Now that they were going to buy people, it might be because of him, or there were other reasons. Since it was Han family young master who said it, Gu Fei was leaning towards the latter. Considering this guy's character, Gu Fei felt that he was most likely trying to make Jian Nanyu feel uncomfortable. In any case, he was definitely trying to make Jian Nanyu's life difficult. Han family young master smiled and said, "This isn't just me. Let's split the money." Everyone burst into tears. Indeed, this was everyone's problem. However, it was definitely Han family young master's idea to buy 100 Years Strategist's help. Why did he have to involve everyone? However, since the conversation had already progressed to this point, no one would be willing to say that they weren't willing to fork out the money. The few of them looked at each other and began to discuss how much money was appropriate. The price of this kind of thing is too abstract. It's really hard to determine. That's right. Besides, the market isn't standardized yet. We can't find a market price for it. Then how much should we pay? The above discussion was carried out in the mercenary channel. Naturally, Gu Fei could see it clearly. These guys used all sorts of excuses and vague answers. In fact, they were quite resistant to paying the money. From Gu Fei's perspective, he felt that the amount of money wasn't the key. It was enough to let 100 Years Strategist feel that it was a very feasible way out. Even if he took a step back and didn't just target robbers, he could just be a fighter in the game and help others PK others without asking for a reason. Gu Fei felt that it was better than going against the rules in reality and teaching martial arts to unknown people who were hard to distinguish between good and evil. Everything had to be prioritized. Sometimes, he could only avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. If he only cared about those rules and regulations, how could he live? Therefore, Gu Fei made the decision for 100 Years Strategist again. Well, you guys can discuss the price again. In any case, we'll take this job first. Let's go and get rid of that Jian Nanyu first. Gu Fei said to the elite squad members, and the last sentence was directed at Encyclopedic Statesman. 100 Years Strategist immediately got up and nodded to them. Then I'll go. I'll go with you, Gu Fei said. I'll wait for the good news of your victory, Han family young master calmly said. What level? Gu Fei asked a more professional question. Whatever. The answer given by the Han clan's young master revealed once again that the person who hired the assassin really wanted to embarrass Jian Nanyu. Let's go. Gu Fei got up and said to 100 Years Strategist. We might not make it in time today. 100 Years Strategist looked at the time. The experts nodded their heads. These two were really the same. Even going offline on time was the same. We can go to Linshui City first. We'll do the details tomorrow. Gu Fei said. 100 Years Strategist nodded. The two got up and said goodbye to the experts and left the tavern. Aren't your brothers coming with you? Gu Fei asked 100 Years Strategist. Are they your students from the bodyguard school? 100 Years Strategist nodded. More or less. I don't think there's a need to call them. There are hundreds of people. If they all come together, how can we split the money? They all have their own careers. Go and work hard as bodyguards, which has a bright future ahead of them. Speaking of which, you can also be a bodyguard. Gu Fei said. I don't even know if I'm a bodyguard or a nanny after following the boss all day. How can I not have any time for myself? 100 Years Strategist was worthy of being a bodyguard coach. He already had a certain understanding of this profession. He probably had the idea of becoming a bodyguard before. It seems that your only way out is to be a professional player. Gu Fei said. Butterfly knot. Cough. The mission's expedition has ended. Now we'll set off in reverse, Linshui City, forward. Chapter 403. It had been a while since Gu Fei and Isher Jingluan left the tavern. Apart from the Han family young master who was still calmly drinking, the others had sunk into a state of absent-mindedness. With this kind of person around, how are we going to survive? After a long time, Unscathed in Battle opened his mouth and sighed. Let's leave this problem for Jian Nan to worry about, said the Han family young master. Aren't we going to follow and take a look? Unscathed in Battle swept his gaze over the others. How an expert of a generation fell. This kind of story should be something that everyone was very interested in. Of course. Let's go take a look. Yutian Shenming jumped up. Don't be anxious, said the Han family young master. The four looked at him, wondering if this guy was up to something again. Is Linshui City a place where we can go whenever we want? Said the Han family young master. What? The four were startled. We need a ship, expert. The Han family young master looked at the four's grave expression in disdain. It was obvious that they thought there was a huge problem. Oh. The four came to a realization. It was easy for the people of Linshui City to ignore this problem. Then they... Unscathed in Battle was speechless. The Han family young master had already remembered this matter, but he unexpectedly didn't remind the two. It was really too vile. There are no ships at this time. Brother Yu took a look at his intelligence notebook and announced. TSK. Yutian Shenming's face was full of schadenfreude. Sword Demon was a bit kinder and sent a message to Gu Fei. At this time, the two had already left the city gate. After receiving the message from Sword Demon, Gu Fei immediately reacted and slapped his forehead. When will there be a ship? He asked the 100 Reincarnations Jinglun. That's right, we need to take a ship to get there. The 100 Reincarnations Jingluan also came to a sudden realization. He hurriedly asked for the time, but after asking he repeatedly shook his head. Not today, it's too late. Let's talk about it earlier tomorrow. Can we catch the earlier boat if we hurry? Gu Fei asked. It's a little difficult, unless you go to the docks and log off now, said 100 Generations Jingluan. The dock of Sunset City was not a safe area for going offline. There was no need to take such a big risk for such a small matter. Let's just do it on the weekends. Do you have time off? Gu Fei said. Yes. Saturday it is then. 100 Generations Jingluan said. After confirming it, the two returned to Sunset City. After the elites learned of this decision, they all rejoiced for Jian Nanyu. His nightmare could finally come 2 days later. It was Thursday now, and there were still 2 days before Saturday. On Saturday, Gu Fei entered the game before noon. The Book of Wisdom was also online as promised. The two of them had already made an appointment 2 days ago. They were going to board the ship that would depart at noon and head to Linshui City. During this gorgeous period of time, the experts of the elite squad were offline. Gu Fei met up with the 100 Eras Jingluan and rushed to the pier. After boarding a boat, they staggered towards Waterside City. This was already the 3rd day after the guild quest, Reigning the Four Seas, was completed. Jian Nanyu foolishly waited in Waterside City for 3 days. Because the Waterside Pier was the most popular place in Waterside City, it was a convenient place to monitor. Every day, Jian Nanyu and a few of his brothers would rush over when a boat came to Sunset City. They would mix in with the customers and stare unblinkingly at the players who disembarked from the boat. The first day had the most people. Although the players of Cloud City didn't have to move together after the quest, because they had to board the boat, everyone still squeezed together. As soon as the boat docked, a dense mass of people rushed out. Jian Nanyu and his group were already mentally prepared. At this moment, they didn't even dare to blink and stared with all their might. However, in this group of people, apart from Jian Nanyu himself, no one else knew who Gu Fei was. They could only first find a mage wearing a black robe and then let Jian Nanyu identify him. Moreover, they couldn't directly rush over to identify him. They had to pretend to sit at the table and calmly drink. It was very tiring. In the end, the people who disembarked from the boat dispersed. They didn't find Gu Fei, Nor did they see the experts of the child elite group. It was the same on the first day. The second day, they didn't see any of the people in this group. On the third day, everyone waited on time for 3 more boats. The number of players coming from Sunset City had clearly decreased, but the person they wanted to see still hadn't arrived. At this time, it was just past noon. The 7 people gathered at the pier again. "You're here." The player in charge of the open-air wine stall skillfully greeted the 7 people. Jian Nanyu was quite depressed. Of course, he didn't want to attract attention, but in order to see clearly, he had to sit in the most advantageous position. In the end, he waited for 3 days and became a regular customer of the wine stall. "The person you're waiting for hasn't arrived yet?" The wine stall player didn't even ask what the 7 people wanted. He directly brought over the drinks they had ordered for the past 3 days and asked a lot of questions. Hee, that's right. Jian Nanyo's smile was a bit awkward. Even their intentions were exposed. Fortunately, it was impossible for those guys to have any dealings with Waterside City, so the news wouldn't leak out. After all, the wine stall player was someone who worked in the service industry for a long time. He was good at reading people's expressions. With one look at the atmosphere, he knew that he wasn't welcome, so he silently left after receiving the money. Looking at the situation, it's very likely that those guys are together, Flaming Jacket said after the player left. Jian Nanyu nodded his head. It had been 3 days, and whether it was Gu Fei or those experts, not a single one had appeared. They were all friends, so it was very likely that they were acting together. "If that's the case, then we can only use Plan B," Jian Nanyu said. Everyone nodded their heads. Of course, they had expected Gu Fei and his expert friends to be together, so they had already designed a plan. "How troublesome!" Archer Glue complained as he yawned. For the past 3 days, none of them had a good night's sleep. The ferry made 6 trips a day, and each trip was 4 hours apart. They didn't want to miss a single trip, so they basically slept for 3 hours at a time. It was very painful. "It's about time." Jian Nanyu looked at the time. The other 6 nodded their heads. They put down their glasses and focused their attention on the water. The ferry was already faintly visible. As the ferry got closer, the 7 of them began to look forward to it. Bang! The ferry touched the shore. They weren't afraid of it breaking. The system's ferry was just that bold. The wooden planks fell from the boat, and the 7 of them felt their hearts skip a beat. Then, groups of people began to walk out of the ferry. Finally, a black robe entered the eyes of the 7 of them. The 6 of them tried their best to confirm that it was a black-robed magician, and not an illusion, before looking at Jian Nanyu. "That's right. It's him." Jian Nanyu let out a long sigh. He felt like he was finally released. Putting aside the matter of whether they could settle it, at least they wouldn't have to wait here anymore. It was too torturous. "I don't see his companions." Fiery Coat was quite excited. People like the Sword Ghost and the Han family's young master were very distinctive. Anyone would be able to recognize them in a crowd. At this time, the people on the ship had all left, but there was no sign of these people. Glue, who could see more clearly than them, concluded, "But he's not alone. He has a companion with him. The others don't seem to know each other." "Plan A or Plan C?" The priest among the 7 asked Jian Nanyu. They came up with a total of 3 plans, A, B, and C. Plan A was for Gu Fei to travel alone, Plan B was for Gu Fei to travel with an expert companion, and Plan C was for Gu Fei not to travel with an expert companion, but to travel with someone else. Even though they had a companion, it didn't seem necessary to use Plan C if they only had one companion. They could still use Plan A. Jian Nanyu was about to come to a conclusion when his eyes suddenly widened. Fiery Coat, Blackwater, and the other priest had the same look on their faces. "What's wrong?" Glue was curious. "Why are they together?" Jian Nanyu was still surprised. "What's wrong?" Glue was still confused. "The guy with the video mage is 100 Live Statesman," Fiery Coat said. During the trip to Sunset City, Jian Nanyu, Flaming Jacket, Blackwater, and the priest had met 100 Reincarnation Jinglin before. However, Glue and the other 2 had died and returned to the city, so they did not know who 100 Reincarnation Jinglin was. Why is the encyclopedic statesman with him? Glue was also shocked. 100 Lives Statesman was a symbol of invincibility in Sunset City, and some players in Sunset City had also brought him to Waterside City. 1 against 20. What a terrifying existence this was. Now that Gu Fei had such a person by his side, it was obvious that he wasn't an A, B, or C. The 3 plans that they had painstakingly formulated didn't work in the end. Gu Fei had an unexpected companion by his side. How did they get together? Didn't they fight at Duel Street a few days ago? Fiery Coat was still confused. No discord, no concord, someone deduced. Why are you still talking about this? How are we going to deal with him? Blackwater looked at Jian Nanyu. When Jian Nanyu recognized that the person was the 100-era statesman, he had already been thinking of countermeasures. At that moment, his brain was operating at high speed like a CPU. On the other hand, 100 Lives Statesman was amazed by the beach of Waterside City after he got off the boat. Seeing is believing. Seeing is indeed better than hearing 100 times. There's grilled fish over there. It tastes pretty good, Gu Fei introduced to 100 Lives Statesman. As the two of them talked and walked, they suddenly stopped and looked at each other. Did you feel it? Gu Fei understood what 100 Lives Statesman meant. Yes, I did. 100 Lives Statesman nodded. Someone is paying attention to us. Gu Fei said. The two turned their heads and looked in the same direction. They found us. Glue exclaimed. What? Jian Nanyu, who was still cosplaying as a CPU, suddenly came back to his senses. He looked up and saw Gu Fei and 100 Lives Statesman looking in their direction. They immediately stared at each other. How can it be? The spot that they chose was inconspicuous. It shouldn't have caught anyone's attention. How did they discover us as soon as they got off the boat? They couldn't figure it out. They're coming. Blackwater shouted. Gu Fei and 100 Lives Statesman were already walking toward their table. Chapter 404. Ken and Yu was a little surprised. This was because Gu Fei and his companion were actually walking straight towards them. This was actually quite abnormal behavior. Although Ken and Yu and the others had been planning to kill Gu Fei for a long time, their intentions hadn't been exposed so far. Gu Fei shouldn't have known that they were up to no good. Then why did he walk over here with such a clear purpose? Why was that? If it was to take revenge for his friends, then why didn't his friends appear? Could it be that he was just passing by, and when he saw us, he suddenly wanted to take revenge, so he came over? Ken and Yu thought that this was the only possibility. Of course, he didn't think that Gu Fei was actually looking for him for business. You said it wasn't easy, but it's so easy. 100 Generations Jinglin praised as he walked. That's why I said that this class has a bright future. Gu Fei said. Brother Yu and the others guessed correctly. Ken and Yu and the others were originally in the top 10 of the class leaderboards, but because they were completely annihilated in the battle against Sunset City, they fell off the leaderboards. The 7 of them were in the same situation. Even though they had dropped a level, they still had their heroism. Otherwise, they wouldn't have continued to calmly plan on how to fight against the experts of the child elite group. However, the appearance of 100 Generations Jinglin at this time had somewhat disrupted their plans. At this time, there was no time for any meticulous planning. Ken and Yu gave the other 6 a look. Don't worry about 100 Generations Jinglin. Do your best to kill the video mage. The 6 nodded. Gu Fei and 100 Generations Jinglin walked step by step. Although the 7 of them didn't move, the bowstring of glue had already been drawn. The flaming cloak had already started to review the chant of the first spell they were going to use. Don't move. Ken and Yu saw that the 2 ranged classes wanted to make the first move, so he hurriedly reached out to stop them and gave them a look. Everyone looked over and saw that the player in charge of the wine stall had already walked over to greet the 2. What do you 2 need? Oh yeah. Gu Fei suddenly thought of something. It's not convenient to PK on this beach, right? The wine stall player's expression immediately changed. 2 other people heard the commotion and rushed over. What's the matter, you 2? Why can't we PK here? Master of the 100 Lives asked. Because it will affect their business. Gu Fei said. That's right. Hearing Gu Fei's words, The other party felt that he was quite sensible, and his expression immediately eased a lot. So if you want a PK, I'll have to trouble the two of you to change places. At this moment, Jian Nanyu had no intention of evading. He smiled and looked at Gu Fei provocatively. Of course, his action was not meaningless. He suddenly realized that although it was hasty to make a move here, it was actually beneficial. At the very least, the 7 of them did not look like they were here to cause trouble. The 2 troublemakers, Gu Fei and Master of the 100 Lives, would be collectively hunted down by all the major guilds in Linshui City. Jian Nanyu naturally welcomed this kind of chaotic scene. He liked to fish in troubled waters in such a situation. Previously, he followed them to Sunset City with this kind of tactical intention. He did not expect that after the previous failure, he would go around in circles, and now he would have such an opportunity in Linshui City. Jian Nanyu really did not want to miss this opportunity, so he looked down on Gu Fei, provoked Gu Fei, and used a smile to provoke Gu Fei. A guy like him, who could easily get dozens of PK points, was definitely a hot-blooded and impulsive person, so he would definitely make a move regardless of everything. Jian Nanyu thought so. In this case, the 7 of them did not even need to make a move. The people from the various guilds on the beach would first stand up. Although they might not be a match for these 2 experts, a chaotic situation had already occurred. What was even more wonderful was that Gu Fei would definitely get PK points again in this chaotic battle. PK points were what professional robbers loved the most. It was the most powerful equipment to improve their work efficiency. Jian Nanyu felt that it was very beautiful when he thought about it, so he continued to increase the intensity of his provocation. Then, he saw Master of the 100 Lives point at him and say, "That person is Jian Nanyu." "I know him." Gu Fei nodded. "He seems to be looking down on you," Master of the 100 Lives said. Gu Fei smiled. "He's about to die. I don't care if he's arrogant for a little longer." Jian Nanyu was depressed when he heard this. It was not because of Gu Fei's contempt, but because he already understood that tricks like provocation were obviously useless against Gu Fei. This person would not disregard everything for such a small matter. In this case, the chaotic scene that he was looking forward to would probably not appear. But then, he heard Gu Fei say to the 3 people, "The 3 of you, I promise that our attacks will be clean and neat. We won't bring any trouble to you." The 3 people were not so easily convinced. They shook their heads like a rattledrum. Moreover, they heard that the person sitting at the table was Jian Nanyu, and there were a total of 7 people at the table. How could this fight be clean and neat as he said? "The 2 of you, we won't ask about your conflicts. However, this is where we do business, so please settle your matters elsewhere." The other party's tone was still polite. People were indeed different. If this was a guild from Moonlit Night City, who would talk so much nonsense with you? They would just kill you. Gu Fei really hoped that the other party would be more violent like the players from Moonlit Night City. Now that they were polite, he was really embarrassed to make a move. "Really?" Gu Fei asked. The other party shook his head. "All right then." Gu Fei looked helpless. He turned around and was about to leave with Bai Jingluan. The 3 people thought that the 2 people would leave and let their guard down. However, Gu Fei suddenly turned around and raised his long sword, pointing it at the sky. "Fire wheel from the sky!" Horani shouted. The table that was full of 7 people a moment ago was instantly empty. Jian Nanyu's group was quick to react. As soon as they heard Fire Lini's shout, they immediately retreated with their chairs. "You!" The 3 players did not expect Gu Fei to do that. They were naturally furious. However, Gu Fei casually put his sword back into his pocket and said calmly, "What's wrong? Can't I just strike a pose?" The 3 of them were startled by Gu Fei's words. When they turned around, they saw that the 7 of them had run in 7 different directions. They were obviously in a sorry state, but there wasn't even a trace of fire in the sky. It was obvious that Gu Fei had simply waved his sword. The 7 of them were too nervous. Indeed, it was just a simple pose. There was no PK, however, the rules of the beach were set by the players, not the system. Naturally, it was very flexible. Although there was no PK, Gu Fei was also causing trouble, so he naturally had to be punished. The three players' faces were completely dark. "Brother, it seems that you're here to cause trouble on purpose." As they spoke, people from other wine stalls also rushed over. They were all players from various guilds. However, Gu Fei shook his head. "No, I'm here to kill people." After saying that, he waved his hand and suddenly disappeared. This was the first time the three of them had seen such a strange disappearance. While they were at a loss, they suddenly heard a cry of surprise from behind them. The three of them quickly turned around, only to discover that the person who was originally with Gu Fei had taken advantage of everyone's attention being diverted by Gu Fei to approach the table. After dodging in panic, he realized that it was just a trick. Before he could adjust his emotions, he discovered that Bai Jingluan had already rushed in front of him and was about to punch him. Having no time to think, Kenan Yu naturally raised his shield to block it. Unfortunately, the person he encountered today was not an ordinary person. When Bai Jingluan's punch came at him, Kenan Yu raised his shield to block it. He blocked Bai Jingluan's punch, but he also blocked his vision. He did not know that Bai Jingluan's punch could change midway. It suddenly turned into a claw and grabbed the edge of his shield. Jian Nanyu followed up with a charge. He used charge with a shield. Although it shortened the attack distance and attack power, it increased the area of attack. When a warrior used charge, it was never for the damage it dealt. The most important thing about charge was its high chance of stunning, as well as allowing the slow-moving warrior to burst forth with extreme movement speed. Almost no one could dodge such a close-range charge with a shield. Unfortunately, Jian Nanyu was up against 100 Reincarnation Jingluan today. He had already expected Jian Nanyu's attack. While grabbing his shield, he immediately used the force to pull back. As Jian Nanyu charged forward, 100 Reincarnation Jingluan threw himself behind him. Kenan Yu's charge missed. When he saw a figure flashing past him, he naturally knew that something was wrong. Sure enough, just as the skill ended, before he could turn around, Bai Jingluan had already grabbed his waist. Kenan Yu only had time to shout, "Oh no!" before he was already in the air. Just like how a warrior would gain speed when using charge, when a Grandmaster of Combat used hug throw, players who were carrying heavy loads would be as light as a feather in their hands. When the three people at the wine stall turned around, they saw Jian Nanyu being thrown out. Even Jian Nanyu's other 6 companions did not have time to react. Everything happened too quickly. When they looked up and noticed the abnormality, they saw the 100 Era's Jingluan swinging his body behind Jian Nanyu and rushing forward to carry him away. But it was not over yet. The place where Kenan Yu was about to land was also specially chosen by Bai Jingluan. It was spacious and would not disturb anyone. At this moment, Gu Fei used teleportation and flew over. The dark night streamer was already raised, and the flames were already faintly flowing on the blade. Kenan Yu wanted to extend his shield to block, but unfortunately he was hit by the Grandmaster of Combat's hug throw. Before he landed, his body was in a forceful state and could not make any movements. Kenan Yu landed, and dust flew everywhere. As one of the 5 strongmen, although Bai Jingluan did not care as much about game equipment like Gu Fei, it was not to the extent that it was unsightly. Just the many system missions that he had obtained in Sunset City were enough for him to be fully equipped. This was not a martial arts competition, so he was naturally fully equipped. The moment he landed, Kenan Yu felt his life slipping away uncontrollably. At the same time, a bright red flame had arrived with the wind. White light. Chapter 405. If this was in the real world, Jian Nanyu's unwilling corpse and bloodstains would be left on the ground. Luckily, this was just a game. After the white light showed off, there was nothing left on the ground. Gu Fei calmly put away his sword and turned around to smile at the 3 people in the wine stall. "Look, I said I would act quickly. I won't cause you any trouble, right?" The 3 of them were speechless. Everything happened too quickly. From Gu Fei raising his sword, the 3 of them getting angry, to Gu Fei disappearing, the 3 of them turning around, Jian Nanyu being sent flying, and Gu Fei slashing down, all of this happened in a few short seconds. The players who stared at this scene collectively forgot to breathe. They were all trying their best to recall what had just happened. The remaining 6 of Jian Nanyo's group of 7 were at a loss. From the moment they figured out what had happened to the moment they had the thought of helping, Jian Nanyu had already died under Gu Fei's sword. That 100 lives Jingluan didn't give them a chance to take revenge. After using the body hug technique, he had already flashed back to Gu Fei's side. We'll meet again if there's a chance. Gu Fei actually said goodbye to the 6 people and then swaggered away with 100 lives Jingluan. He opened the mercenary channel and sent a message. This is the first time. So fast. Brother Yu was extremely shocked. Looking at the time, the 2 of them should have just gotten off the boat. Could it be that Jian Nanyu was standing at the pier waiting for them to kill him? Heh, our luck isn't bad. We met him as soon as we got off the boat. Gu Fei said. He was waiting for us. Han family young master said. Everyone immediately reacted. They also thought that Jian Nanyu was secretly waiting for them at the pier and was unfortunately exposed by Gu Fei. Of course, in reality, Jian Nanyu was waiting for Gu Fei. This was something the experts didn't know. How many times do I have to kill him? Gu Fei asked. The work had already begun, so he couldn't be careless anymore. Of course, he had to understand the work first. Kill as many as you can. Anyway, isn't it a piece of cake for you? The Han family young master casually threw Jian Nanyu into the bottomless abyss. It was obvious that he did not have any sympathy. That's true, Gu Fei admitted. If he was alone, he wouldn't care about Jian Nanyu and the others. Moreover, he had a powerful assistant like the 100 reincarnations Jingluan. Gu Fei was excited when there was a fight. He had forgotten that the Encyclopedia of Classics was the main character. He should be here to help. Should we continue? 100 eras Jingluan asked Gu Fei. Naturally, he could not see the conversation in the elite group channel. Kill. Gu Fei nodded. Since someone is paying, just kill. This money is too easy to earn. 100 eras Jingluan was excited. Warrior camp, I wonder if we can stop this guy. Let's take a look first. Gu Fei was already very experienced in this kind of thing. At a time like this, a scheming person would most likely set up a trap in the camp and wait for you to walk right into it. However, he was skilled and daring. At this time, killing the target and the trap at the same time would naturally be the most satisfying thing to do. Therefore, he was too lazy to care so much about it. After the 2 left the beach tavern, their figures gradually disappeared. However, the shock they left behind did not fade away. Especially the 3 people in the wine stall. After looking at each other, one of them said, "Let's inform the guild leader." Indeed, Gu Fei's actions were clean and neat. It was so fast that it did not even cause chaos. It did not affect their tavern's business at all. However, the problem was that Gu Fei's actions had broken their rules. This was something that would damage their reputation. Regardless of whether it was an expert or a guild, the more powerful they were, the more they would value their reputation. Gu Fei had killed a person in their wine stall in front of everyone. If they did not take any action and let the matter rest, there would definitely be people who would use this topic to cause trouble in the future. Even if they did not cause any trouble, they would sometimes make a few sarcastic remarks and mock their guild for bullying the weak and fearing the strong. It was also very unbearable for them to have double standards when they saw an expert. So, even though Gu Fei's actions didn't cause any material harm to them, it was a mental blow. The 3 of them also realized that they couldn't just let this matter slide. So, they hurriedly notified their guild leader and let him make a decision. While the guild was focused on this matter, Horini immediately turned to a cleric beside him and said, "Dao Xiang, quick." After Gu Fei and encyclopedic strategist left, Horini's group of 7 turned to a cleric beside him. The cleric's full name was Dao Xiangmu. He had been staring at the spot where Jian Nan had disappeared. At this moment, he nodded slightly and quickly walked forward. He took out his magic staff and carefully drew it on the ground. Then, he pointed the magic staff at the ground and took out a small book with his left hand. After flipping to a page, he held it in front of him and started chanting. This strange scene immediately attracted the attention of many players. The other 5 members of the group of 7 also stood by the side, protecting Dao Xiangmu in the middle. What are they doing? What is that guy in the middle chanting? He's not chanting, is he? Dao Xiangmu's posture was very difficult to understand. He was chanting while casting a spell, but he was holding a small book in front of him. This was really out of place. Could it be a very long chanting? The people's wisdom was endless, and they were getting closer to the truth with their guesses. What kind of spell is that? The chanting was so long that they couldn't remember it. It was obviously a very powerful spell. At this moment, everyone looked at the spot where Jian Nan had cast the spell. Someone finally guessed the truth. Could it be white light shone again? At the empty space where Dao Xiangmu's spell was pointing, a layer of white light that looked like a half-dead cloud appeared. But soon, the layer of white light emitted an extremely dazzling light that was so bright that people couldn't open their eyes. Fortunately, the light disappeared in a flash, and Jian Nan reappeared on the empty space in the position where he had died. Black Water bent down and helped him up. Fire Lini had already passed him some bread and fruits. Jian Nan took it and let out a long sigh. He looked around and asked, "Gone?" The 6 people nodded. Inakagami kept his notebook and also took out some fruits to eat. Jian Nan looked at the countless surprised gazes around him and sighed. They saw us? The 6 people nodded helplessly. Resurrection. Dao Xiangmu's incantation was so long that he couldn't remember it. The effect was actually resurrection. This was a skill that wasn't even mentioned in the official announcement. The players had thought that resurrection didn't exist in this game. At this moment, the Linshui City players witnessed the entire process of resurrection and were shocked speechless. They were shocked twice in a row and didn't know what to say. Let's leave this place first. Jian Nan, you didn't even care about eating and called for the others to leave. A man's wealth was his own ruin. As a robber, Jian Nan Yu and his group understood this better than anyone else. This resurrection skill was called Resurrection of the Dead in the parallel world. It was a skill that only priests had. Priests were supposed to be healers, but when they had resurrection skills, they would become gods. Although Resurrection of the Dead was troublesome to cast and the chanting was extremely long, the value of this skill was indescribable given that the players would lose a lot of EXP after dying in the parallel world. Players who were resurrected by Resurrection of the Dead would be exempted from death. Of course, this did not include the equipment, money, or other items that were dropped upon death. If these items were picked up by others, they couldn't be resurrected. The cooldown time of this insane skill was even more insane. It was as long as 12 hours. Furthermore, the cooldown time was cumulative, so there was no need to go offline. The skill would be restored to its usable state after coming back online. The players who accepted Resurrection of the Dead also had 3 requirements. Firstly, they had to do it within 5 minutes of death. Secondly, they had to not leave the resurrection area after death. Thirdly, they had to accept the system notification of the resurrection ritual. Therefore, when they saw Gu Fei, an encyclopedic strategist, leaving in a hurry after killing Dao Xiangmu, they decided to use this skill. After all, dropping from level 40 to level 39 was a completely different concept from dropping from level 41 to level 40, even though the EXP loss from level 41 was higher. The 7 of them left the beach in a hurry under the burning gazes of the players. They had no doubt that in a few days, all the players in the parallel world would know that resurrection skills existed in the game. This insane skill wasn't something that only clerics would want to possess. Teams with fixed clerics would also want their clerics to master resurrection skills. In theory, it was impossible to rob skills. However, the problem was that experienced players knew that skills that didn't exist in the official skill tree were usually skills that came with equipment. Dao Xiangmu's Resurrection of the Dead was a skill that came with his Staff of Resurrection. With the current status of Dao Xiangmu's group of 7 in the field of robbing, he was sure that within 5 days, there would definitely be people looking for them for the resurrection skill. Thinking of this, Dao Xiangmu could only smile bitterly. Of course, he had many excuses to reject this mission. However, the problem was that he didn't know if there would be people like him looking for him. Although Dao Xiangmu had never heard of a high-end robbing group like the 7 of them, He was sure that such a group definitely existed. It seemed like both parties would meet in such a manner. This matter could only be discussed in the future. Right now, he had to continue with this business. At this time, the 7 of them had arrived at the city gate near the beach. These 2 guys seem to be coming for me, Dao Xiangmu said. The 6 of them nodded. They targeted Dao Xiangmu the moment they arrived. With such a targeted target, the conclusion was self-evident. Then, they might go to the warrior camp to stop me now, Dao Xiangmu said. Jianan Yu said, he has some PK points right now. We should think of a way to increase his PK points. That way it will be easier for us. Butterfly Knot, good morning everyone, a new month has arrived, and a new chaotic battle is about to begin. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.